If you were trying to win $3 million on Underdog Fantasy, if you were trying to chase Kerrane, what would you do? You might want to pick the brains of Kerrane himself. You might want to learn from one of the best analysts out there. Rotoviz is Shawn Siegele. And I said, why don't we just bring that all under one umbrella? Every single Wednesday, Best Ball Breakfast expansion, 10 a.m., one draft with the champ, one draft with Shawn Siegele. It's Best Ball Breakfast. It's the Wednesday new slot with Pat and Shawn. Let's do it.
Oh, another Influencer 101 for the backward hats, bro. Rigged!
Zach Ertz with no Tyler Algier bringback? Yikes.
You reached around for correlation? That's a no-no. You ADP bros disgust me. How about you just live a little? Handcuffing might actually be a way to get unique if the field's avoiding it. The Wi-Fi at this resort is a disaster?
These fucking streamers don't have player takes.
What if a piss boy draft is the room you need?
Oh! You know, Pat, you and I did a draft on this channel the night Best Ball Mania 4 opened. It was a Saturday. And even looking back at those ADPs, even just like looking at the calendar, it truly feels like that was an eternity ago with how much has already changed. We've had like 4 different contests since then. We've truly lived a Best Ball lifetime since
we
then.
have. I like Best Ball Mania is almost like a distant memory at this point. I'm nostalgic for the Best Ball Mania days. I've been drafting. I did my Dalmatian. I'm in my Dalmatian slow right now. I went to the slow streets. I've on DraftKings a little bit. I'm in the Bulldog streets. I'm not really doing a ton of Best Ball Manias right now. I did the puppy. That was also a nice little moment in my life, which is passed by. But yeah, it's quite the summer. It's already been amazing just how many tournaments we've been able to jump in.
One of the things I remember from that draft is we were talking about Jahmyr Gibbs. You and I, in our first draft, we did a 0 RB draft, and our first pick was Jahmyr Gibbs. He had an ADP of 57 when we selected him, and we took him at pick 49. And I remember saying to you, and this works out very well because Shawn Siegele is going to be joining later. I said, Shawn said Jahmyr Gibbs shouldn't escape the 3rd round. And we're like, all right, let's pump the brakes here. Let's pump the brakes.
Take it easy, Shawn.
Sure enough, he is now a fixture of the 3-4 turn.
Yeah. He did. It seems like maybe he's falling a little bit into the 4th more often, which I was worried he was going to get steamed up into like the mid 3rd. But the 3rd is crowded this year, so he wasn't able to hang out there for too long. But yeah, Shawn wanted it as always. You get to a point in the draft where you're like, he's by far the most exciting name.
Yeah. And, you know, as I've mentioned, and I've gotten lots of questions like, is this going to be different guests each week? No, every single week, Pat Kerrane in the first block, Shawn Siegele in the second block, going to be 2 drafts, just like my Best Ball Breakfast on Mondays, except me bullshitting solo for 2 hours. I'm going to have 2 of the sharpest people in the industry and excited to draft with these guys. And I will say, Pat, Shawn sent me over a preview of his ranks. And as usual, they are just wild, man. I was just going through it. I was like, holy shit. And I told him, I was like, we could get a CSV and, you know, upload and draft off of your ranks. And he's like, you know what? I'm sending you over a blended one with Michael Dubner's ranks because he's like, that'll get us closer to ADP on some of my picks. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a shit ton of a few of these guys.
Yeah, that's a funny, like sometimes with Shawn, I'm like, man, he should really bake in the market. And then then I find out that he like kind of has.
Yeah.
It's like he's not afraid to get different.
Yeah. And so you guys will get introduced to Shawn in the second block, but all of the other usual things apply around here. We are live streaming my Best Ball Mania 4 drafts as I march toward 150. Today with Pat will be, I believe I have it here. Yep. Number 27 nice. With Pat. So on a nice pace, over a 1/6 of the way done. Same thing when this video is finished, you guys leave a comment that will get you entry into our giveaway, which I'm going to do $1,500 cash total, $500 to 3 different winners when I hit 15,000 subs on the channel. And I'll give you guys some good news. We are on a great pace right now to hit that. I legit think we could hit that by end of June, maybe early July if we stay on this pace. So, and I will say this too. I'll throw out some stretch goals. If we hit 15K early before the end of Best Ball Summer, we'll keep the comments and stretch goals going. So things are going well. And Pat, I know you too. Have you run out of your underdog credits for leg up, or are those still out there?
I have not yet. I still have some credits left. They are over 2/3 gone, I believe now. But I do have some credits left. These are $50 underdog credits, which I'm giving out as part of the deal for signing up for a yearly subscription for Legendary Upside. That's normally $99 a year, but I'm also offering a $30 discount right now. So if you go to legendaryupside.com/early, you can get your first year for $69. And then you also get a $50 underdog credit. So pretty sweet deal. Also, if you are considering signing up for Spike Week, you can get 40% off your Spike Week subscription. So if you play an underdog and you're going to sign up for Spike Week, be financially responsible and sign up for my site.
There you go. All right, Pat, I did get us into this draft, so we are ready to roll here. We got the Influencer 1-9. First of all, how many Best Ball Mania drafts are you up to? I know you said you've been messing around with
I think
DK
10
puppies. 10, yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually trying to stop. Like, I don't want to draft a ton right now. I know you have to keep dripping them in because you're streaming all of them, but for me, I'm like, this feels like a little bit of a dead period. We're gonna get it sounds like a second wave of suspensions with the gambling stuff, and so I'm just like, I don't know. It's just pure randomness, right? Like, I don't think I can draft in a way. I guess I could do a little more zero running back or something, but we don't know who's going to get suspended, and I kind of would feel like maybe my best move is just to have more bullets if more news comes down the pike that way. So
I think that is the thing that's tough too, right? Where it's just like, and we've talked about this with barbelling, where obviously if you had an infinite amount of time, you could be more intentional about when you draft, but life and things happen. So even if you catch a good drafting window, then you're like, oh, I want to maximize it in this tournament. I want to pop over and do it over at this tournament. And then next thing you know, you don't even have the time to capitalize how you would like.
Yeah. And I am drafting. I mean, I'm drafting in some slows right now. The Bulldog on Underdogs, pretty cool tournament, high stakes tournament. Those are slow drafts, which I hate, but it's a cool enough structure where I sucked it up and I'm doing that. So I'm draft. I've been doing a lot of the DraftKings $10, which is, that huge final week. And that's where I'm like, this is so chaotic that maybe, and also like, I don't really like drafting on DraftKings. And I'm just like, kind of, if I'm not going to draft in Best Ball Mania, I might as well just like suck it up and go try to get that maxed. So that's how I'm playing.
I was wondering how you were going to handle it because the Bulldog and Dalmatian are fun tournament structures, more mid-stake stuff, but they are slow drafts. So I was wondering how you anti-slow draft bros were handling that. Although we are on the clock here. Diggs falls one pick past ADP. Anything else you'd like to mess around with here?
No, I'm good with Diggs.
And I should mention for these drafts, and part of the fun is right now I have Pat's rankings loaded in to Underdog for the second draft. I'll load Shawn's in. But with a leg up subscription, Pat has a CSV download of his ranks, which I noticed did you just update them this morning? Did I see, Pat?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you get regular updated ranks. It's super easy. You go to the rankings page. You can go to the CSV upload download, literally just press the upload from the file on your desktop and you're good to go. Just a couple of clicks there. So recommend checking those out. I've almost been exclusively using Pat's ranks early on because I think you did a really good job of kind of getting out ahead of what we expect to be closing line value, specifically with the rookies, where if you are just drafting off of ADP early on, you're going to forget Marvin Mims is kicking around back there. You're going to forget Jaden Reed. So I've really enjoyed drafting off of your kind of rookie heavy ranks early on.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, I think the rankings, I've been pleased with how they came out. I do bake ADP into them, but I allow them to get, especially in certain pockets of the draft, the ADP isn't as much of a factor. And early on, I actually boosted the rookies.
All right. So do you want to do the Josh Allen or do we want to mess around? I mean, Ekeler falling to 16 here is pretty nice.
I think I don't have a lot of Ekeler, and I like him at 16.
I thought so. Pat likes him because he won him $2 million. I like him because he plays the Bills in week 16. We each have our own reasons for making this selection.
Well, I like him. So I've actually not drafted a lot of Ekeler. Shortly after the season ended, I drafted a lot of Ekeler. You can make pretty good guesses about why that was. He had just won me a lot of money, but then I started to look at his rushing numbers and get a little bit nervous. He's 28 years old now. He didn't have a great success rate, which I was actually going to have an article out on success rate soon, as being kind of an interesting stat to look at for running back efficiency. But he, basically my feeling was, okay, if I'm going to layer on contract uncertainty on top of a 28-year-old running back who's undersized and, is always kind of at risk of losing goal line touches, I'm like not that interested. It's not just that he didn't want to be there. It's that like they could bring in someone else if they felt like he was a malcontent, and he's like pretty susceptible to that. So I kind of faded him for a while, but now that he got a reworked contract, I feel a lot better about it. I think, he's not, he's kind of a dog to have the same type of amazing role that he had before, but like, that's why you can get him on the 1-2 turn instead of at the 105.
Yeah, and what's interesting, what feels like somewhat of an ADP comparable? Do you remember that year? Was it Jonathan Taylor's rookie year, or was it his second year where there was the uncertainty about the quarterback situation and he was kind of hanging around in the early to mid second? And then was it they got Wentz and then he immediately like snapped back up into like the late first, but there was that window where people were kind of just worried about the overall situation. What's funny is like I assumed this Ekeler dip weren't necessarily the concerns you were talking about, but more just like, is he going to be on the Chargers? But then literally yesterday, we got news that he is in fact going to be on the Chargers, which then makes it interesting that he would be sliding right after this past ADP. I kind of thought that would have given drafters the confidence to select him in the back end of round 1 going forward.
I moved him up. I moved him right up to the back end of round 1. Because I think there are real reasons to be worried about Ekeler. I mean, the research that I've done on legendary upside for running backs is that you do want the guys who are younger, like even younger than you think. And 28 is like very old for a running back, but I don't know. I mean, yeah. Ekeler is an awesome receiving back. So you do have that. And I don't think that's going to last a little longer. And they don't really have anybody else. So I think he is susceptible. Like if they were to bring in Fournette, that would be a problem for him. That would be like a real problem for him. And
Zeke wouldn't be a problem though.
Zeke wouldn't. Zeke, his numbers were so bad last year. And he was actually really bad in the ways you'd think Zeke would be good. Like his success rate was horrible. You think Zeke would be the guy who like hits the right hole, be like a good goal line back type of guy. But he actually sucked at that last year. So, I think the odds of something happening that really fundamentally changes the bet in a negative way on Ekeler, I think went down a lot once that contract situation was resolved.
Yeah. I did realize this is Best Ball Breakfast. I do traditionally pour a cup of coffee here. I'm down to my last cup, Pat. So you know how these ASMR sickos enjoy this. So hopefully I don't spill on myself like I did yesterday. Does that get it going for you, Pat? A little coffee drip?
Honestly, that was
make
beautiful.
It move for you?
I didn't expect it to have much of an impact, but it was actually kind of nice.
There you go. Yeah. I mean, people really come around to it here. I was holding out hope as this room was kind of de-emphasizing the quarterbacks. We have a run here. Hurts, Mahomes. I thought it would be really fun if we could sneak in an Allen at 3-9. Yeah. That does not happen. This is the tough range of the draft board, this 3-4 turn. I know we both like Andrews. Gibbs always in the conversation here. What do you think?
I love Andrews. If we're not going receiver, that's who I would take. To me, he's kind of a 2-3 turn type of value, and you can consistently get him in kind of the mid to late third. I think it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I'm very much with you on the elite tight end stuff this year. Very much with you on Andrews. I love the dip on George Kittle and Kyle Pitts. Dallas Goedert's price is really nice. And so I'm going to keep making that selection as well. And then you mentioned we're obviously going to be in the market for a wide receiver at this next pick. I find this tier kind of flat, and you have it here in your ranks: Ridley, Cooper, Mike Williams, Watson, Keenan. And the nice thing is with Ekeler, right? We have a couple outs for building out maybe a Charger stack. And then maybe in this room where quarterbacks are getting de-emphasized, maybe Herbert falls to us at the back end of the 5th round.
That'd be pretty nice. That'd be very nice. Like that thought.
And it does seem like you have an aggressive ranking on Keenan. Do you still have, you're still Mike Williams though ahead of,
I'm still
Keenan,
Mike Williams
right?
ahead. Yeah. But that's because the ADP is pretty I have them back to back in my ranks. I mean, I like them both.
Yeah.
Keenan has had some pretty big target games, more a couple years ago, but he's young enough where I think he's still got a lot of upside. Just in terms of turning in one of those monster target weeks in a week that really matters.
Yeah, so now we're in a spot where you could take, Watson at ADP, or we could reach slightly ahead for Keenan here. It looks like
I think this is a Keenan spot. You talk about maybe it's getting Herbert, which is, I think, pretty realistic. Fields and Burrow are both going to get past this pocket. Someone might try to do like a DJ Moore Fields thing on the turn there. The Jamar Chase guy might grab Burrow, but then, we're basically looking at this Breece guy going like unstacked Herbert would be like the way he snipes us, which would be weird.
Yeah, and you look at this board, right? So the Mike Williams drafter, Raise It, is behind us. We're going to be blocking him on the comeback. We have 4 straight elite quarterback drafters here. You mentioned the Higgins drafter. It would be an unstacked, slightly ahead of ADP or at ADP snipe on Herbert for him to not come back to us, which, trust me, I have seen much weirder things happen in drafts. But I think just strategically, if you are trying to set stuff up in this room, and now we see Fields, Burrow go, there's really only 2 teams that don't have a quarterback yet, and both of them would be taking it unstacked. So I kind of like that idea of pushing it in that spot. Yeah.
And we'll see. I mean, I like the Chargers Denver one a lot because we don't have Herbert, so what? We could always take it from the Broncos side later if we want. But we could, and Sutton goes late enough, and Marvin Mims is so nice. Dulcich sometimes falls a lot, so there's ways to kind of backdoor that with Russ. But also, we could just like abandon the quarterback part of that completely, figure out quarterback somewhere else. And we have Ekeler and Keenan Allen. Like, if the Chargers are rolling, we're going to be good.
Yeah. Real quick too here before I forget, see a couple of you guys becoming new YouTube members. Appreciate that. That gets you access, if you're a best ball value hound, to that private channel in the Deposit Kingdom Discord, where I do tip off when I enter the draft. There were 3 spots when I joined, so only a few of you got in there. But if you'd like to get tipped off when I join drafts, best way is in there. And excuse me. And also get you access to the Best Ball After Dark streams. So I'm going to have another one of those later this week. John Warner from the Badge Bros is going to be joining me on that one.
Nice.
Gotten to know John a little bit content-wise, but actually don't know a ton about his backstory. I know he was playing professional poker for a while, and so I'm excited to learn more about John and his thoughts about the ever-growing best ball landscape here. So those are some of the perks you guys get as a YouTube member. And Pat, we are headed here toward our pick at 5-7.
Yeah, I mean, I think pretty simple. If this guy's going to sort of decide what we do, but if we had to go receiver here, I think that would be fine too.
Yep. Let's see here. So Justin Herbert falls. This feels like an easy click. No reason to risk it, knowing Raise It would probably love to take Herbert with Mike Williams there.
Exactly. Yeah, that half of the board needs the quarterbacks.
This is a fun one too. I'm trying to think like the way ADP lines up, not impossible to get Ekeler, Keenan, Herbert teams, but it could end up getting very difficult to get it at the prices we did if Ekeler inevitably moves into the back end of round 1. Like we're probably sneaking in an extra pick to this triple stack or these 3 Chargers that maybe the rest of the drafters going forward will have access to.
Yeah, maybe we're getting, Diggs over Garrett Wilson. Like, that's a direct 1-for-1 swap that another team like this might have, which feels pretty good.
It does. So we do now have our Charger stack. Like you said, tons of Denver options late. We also already have kind of our little game stack there for week 16 to help us advance out of that pod. Of course, you got to finish first out of 16 in week 16 in your pod to get to week 17, which is obviously a difficult task. This is always one of the only downsides, Pat, I feel like, of taking the elite tight end early, like the Kelsey and Andrews, is, man, sometimes the value on Pitts and Goddard here jumps out, and we don't want to be going double tight end here, but we still have some nice wide receiver options.
Yeah, it is tough, though. I mean, this is it's not like we're completely locked out at receiver, but it's it is a little early for these guys, isn't it?
Yeah. So do you go, this is one of those spots too, where you have Addison in the ranks. I sometimes play at Ayuk based on ADP just because I won't get a lot of Ayuk sometimes. But what do you like here? I know obviously you like Addison, but
I might go Addison, and then there's some of these like guys who have jobs later. Like maybe we can get a Deontay in the 7th. Burks is probably the other guy there that I would just personally, I'm just very high personally on Burks.
I think we're drafting a crappy team because the chat always likes it. Even the contrarian Bullock, who doesn't like my teams, likes this one. Ashmal says this is sick. Dylan says, how do you get the matchups on there like this? I'm using the Brick Draft Caddy. We've talked about it on episodes of Lulz. You can basically put any information you want in there. So I have week 16 matchup, week 17 matchup, dome games indicated by the X, and then my current Best Ball Mania exposure. So I can hang out here naked, and you guys can see I'm only even on the field with a few of these guys overweight. Traylon Burks. I know you're only 10 drafts deep, Pat, but do you have any kind of like interesting player stands where you're like, holy cow, I have 60% of Marvin Mims kind of stuff?
I haven't even looked yet at my Best Ball Mania exposures. I'm just kind of drafting off vibes, and then I'll go fix it later. That's kind of how I like to do it. And then because I like it, I like things to kind of jump out to me a little bit and be like, oh, I probably need to keep that more in mind. That's what happened last year, unsurprisingly, on Ronald Jones, where I was like, you are drafting too much, Ronald Jones. I had a little sit down, and then I drafted more Rashad White as a result.
Speaking of that, and I heard you guys talking about it on ADP Chasing on Monday, which I know you guys have heard me mention it on this channel, but over on Ship Chasing, so most of you guys know, Pat and I, along with Ben Gretsch, every single Wednesday night, do Ship Chasing. I'm doing like plugs within plugs, like a Russian nesting doll of plugs. We're having Eric Bybfor on Ship Chasing tonight. Those of you who have tuned in previous summers know that we like to gal brain talking about best ball strategy and the ADP landscape. So we got to fire one of those up. That's at 9:15. But I was talking about ADP Chasing, a show that Sam Sherman, Davis, and Pat do on Mondays. Gretsch filled in for Sam this week, but you guys were talking about something that I've now lost because I started talking about so many goddamn. I literally don't know what I started out to say. What were we talking about?
I don't know. I don't even know what
what
would have spurred that comment.
There was something you guys had a discussion on ADP Chasing that I wanted to reference, and now I completely lost the thread. I plugged myself up.
Was it about exposures? About Ronald Jones and Rashad White seemed.
It was Ronald Jones. In talking about Davis made a point that I thought was astute, which is that we do want to draft the RB2 on the Cowboys, but the market doesn't know who the RB2 is right now, and so all of them are free.
Yeah. And I think I got Malik Davis up into my rankings just because I think Davis is making a good point about that too.
Would you want to do, Quentin Johnson in triple stack this?
Yeah, so he's rated ADP, right?
Yeah.
Let's do it. We need the receiver pretty bad.
Yeah, and because I was going to bring this up with like the Addison stuff where I'm like, if you were making me choose between Addison or Johnston for this specific team, I would prefer Johnston, but we went ahead and just got both of them here.
Yeah, I think we're behind at wide receiver. We have 2 solid veterans and 2 rookies through 7 rounds. So I would consider us like not like fully in trouble at wide receiver, but we're definitely like behind schedule.
Yeah, I agree. So for the audio listeners I will always service here, our team so far, Justin Herbert at quarterback, Austin Ekeler at running back, the $2 million man himself, wide receiver, Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnston, tight end, Mark Andrews. So very heavy on the Chargers, got some one-off alphas in Diggs and Andrews, feathered in Jordan Addison as well.
Pretty fun.
And I think this is going, you guys were talking about this on ADP Chasing, kind of these sweet spots of the draft and the monster cliff that happens at wide receiver here. I think this should set up decently for us to kind of snag one more wide receiver before it really gets dicey.
That's exactly what we need. We like pretty badly need one more wide receiver to help fill us out.
Yep. This is a good question too, and I think always a big debate as far as the stacking versus overstacking. NorCal asking, do you stop stacking at 3 like that, or do you ever take 4 on the same team? My thought, Pat, is if it's an elite offense and you're being price conscious, I don't mind pushing it. But we have spent a lot of capital on the Chargers. Sutton goes, which really stings, Pat.
That really does sting. God. I don't know, man. Do you have anyone that jumps out here?
Do you want to just do a value hound on Cam Akers or Dalvin?
That might be the best move.
Do you like Akers or Dalvin?
I kind of like Akers better. Dalvin was bad last year.
Is Dalvin maybe a bit of a falling knife right now?
I think he might be. I mean, if he goes to the Dolphins, people will get excited, and then this will seem like a great value. But so I've talked about how I was looking at success rate, and one of the things I'm looking at is like maybe it helping us predict like who's going to have a chance to have like monster touchdown seasons. Because like, you know, is there any correlation between, you know, a guy's success rate and how many green zone carries they get in the following year? And it's not like a huge, but there is a little bit of a correlation there. And Dalvin was, I believe, the worst in the entire league among running backs with at least 200 carries. Zeke was second worst. So it's like not surprising that the teams are kind of like, I think you might be done. Like, I think that I was actually like Fournette when he got cut by the Jaguars was coming off a horrendous success rate season. So I think if there's like a running back efficiency stat that might like help us figure out like who is actually going to be in their team's good graces, it might be NFL Next Gen success rate. And so I don't know. I mean, yeah, obviously his team's out on him, but is another team going to look at what he did last year and be like, yeah, this is our guy, this is our workhorse?
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing too. I mean, we were even talking about this before the NFL draft, like the amount of, and Sam had made a chart for this on ADP chasing, like the number of clean landing spots where, you know, at this stage, you know, if Ekeler got traded, right? Like Ekeler is going to carve out his role. Like, you know, he's going to get his touches. But to your point, I think it's safe to question now with Dalvin Cook's skill set, never been a huge plus in the pass game. Can he go and just immediately command 20 touches in a lot of spots? I don't really think he can.
Yeah, I don't think he can. And I mean, you know, they just like the Dolphins just drafted A-Chain, and like Wilson and Mostert aren't very good, but they're fine. I actually don't really feel that confident that Cook would like completely displace those other Miami running backs and be awesome there. I think he'd be a committee guy. And I know the market wouldn't feel that way.
They would be so jazzed. And I'm like, the Dolphins feels like a bad spot for him just on the competition. They like retain 2 capable veterans and then draft a pretty explosive rookie. Like that feels like a not good spot for him.
Yeah, it really isn't ideal, I don't think. He would probably have some good games though. And I think if he were to go there and you had a chance to get like 8th round Dalvin and past, you'd feel bummed.
So we are behind at wide receiver. This has turned into just an all-out piss boy avalanche room. You know, there are some, you know, Charbonnet, you can see here, I've been drafting the shit out of him in this range. AJ Dillon correlates with Addison. It's definitely a bit of a tear gap for wide receiver. Anything jumping out to you here? You could stack up Addison as our second quarterback and be done at QB.
I think we go maybe Dillon.
Yeah. And then see if we push quarterback just a little bit and see how that shakes out. I just need to do this, man, because I didn't realize we were getting buried in an avalanche, Pat.
Oh, dear God.
All right.
I love the updated clip.
Yeah.
Guy more.
Shout out to Lou. We were in the lab on that, and I said, I was like, I think my actual line to him was, I like the analogy that the last thing you see before you die is Sky Moore coming at your face.
Oh dear God.
geez, have some respect to our first guest. Where is Shawn? Shawn will be here at 11 a.m. I'm drafting back-to-back drafts every Wednesday. Pat gets the morning shift, 10 a.m. Shawn's out more on the West Coast time zone, so that was a big ask.
That's even earlier for him, actually.
Even getting a multimillionaire out of bed at 10 a.m. feels like an ass. So, I'm glad you're able to get the crusties out of your eyes and do this show.
No, I know. I did have a few crusties in there. I took Murphy to the dog park this morning, off leash hours until 9. So I was up a little bit for this, but not too much before this, to be honest.
Yeah. So this is, thinking about like this spot we're in here, the pick is probably Cousins, right? And then we just spray and pray at wide receiver down the stretch, or do you think pushing quarterback even more?
I mean, we could go like Brian Robinson or, and then because what we need to do here, we've gone here running back. So taking care of running back would help us not have to spend those picks later. But I'd be okay with Cousins too if you wanted to go him.
Let's do Cousins. I think so. The reason I'm thinking this is just because the board is so gross for wide receiver. There's going to be like one of these picks in rounds like 11 through 15 where like the running back is by far the best available pick in a way that it will just feel gross to pass on it. And if we close the door on our running back optionality, it could really force a gross reach at wide receiver. So it's like, why don't we just take care of quarterback, knowing we're good there, and now we still leave ourselves outs for a tight end and running back pick if we just absolutely hate what's there at wide receiver.
I like it. Yeah, I think that was a better pick. And I mean, I like Brian Robinson, but I don't absolutely love him. And we have Cam Akers and AJ Dillon. Those are pretty solid, like RB2 guys. Like Robinson, what Robinson provides is kind of, probably some production out of the gate. He's not the most exciting guy, but he should get some work. But does he have the work by the end of the season? I don't know. So he's kind of like, we already kind of made that bet with Cam Akers. So
yeah. So a comment here from 10 Minute, and these rooms obviously are unique rooms from what you guys are normally going to be drafting in when you hop in a draft. He says, if you don't have 4 wide receivers through 7, you're probably paying the rake based on these ADPs. So I think both Pat and I are big believers of getting wide receivers early and often. We both like having, at least 4 to 5 by round 10. That said, I do think this dynamic is almost similar to how I feel about the Superflex drafting board too, where it's like, we do not want to draft watered down wide receiver version teams of the other teams who have hammered it, right? Like if we just draft worse wide receivers in the same structure, those other teams are going to beat us. So how do we beat them? We're beating them at the other positions with quality, and then we're going to make up for our lack of wide receiver power with quantity. So to me, this is one of those things, like in a perfect world, Pat and I would have way more high quality wide receivers, but we're still trying to draft the best possible team for the room we have, focusing on correlation, other positions. That's how I think about it and why I don't lose my mind, because I don't get the exact structure I would ideally have.
Yeah, I do think that I think I'm in like the minority among fantasy football analysts because the general vibe is like the rooms have lost their mind, because this room used to be like a true piss boy ship chasing room. This is just kind of normal now. Like it's a little bit harsher in terms of these wide receivers still continuing to fly off the board, but it's not that different than like a normal underdog draft. Or if you're like the high stakes stuff, the Bulldog drafts, like those are even more wide receiver heavy than the typical Best Ball Mania. So this has just become commonplace. And I think I'm in the minority a bit where I'm just like, I think this might be efficient because it's really hard to swim against. It's really, really hard to go the other way. I mean, we went the other way. We had 4 wide receivers through 7 rounds, and we went the other way. We actually are weak at wide receiver compared to a lot of the other teams, and I don't love it. I don't love being weak at wide receiver.
No, I don't either. I kind of like Dobbs kind of stands out to me here as far as like ADP, and we are, kind of playing this Minnesota thing through Dillon and maybe a double bring back there, but also I'm okay with any of the other guys you have ahead of him.
Yeah, I'm okay with Dobbs. I really like Alec Pierce.
Yeah.
I think he's just a fun pick, but
he
doesn't provide any kind of correlation element.
And I just was thinking, like, if there's a chance, Razit's moving on to other positions here, a couple 6 wide receiver teams, maybe we can push another guy here.
Yeah, the
But
ADP game, Dobbs is the better pick for sure.
yeah. So now we're at a 2-3-5-1 build here. Justin Herbert, Kirk Cousins. We got some nice week 17 stacks going with both of these teams. Our running backs, Austin Ekeler, Cam Akers, AJ Dillon. Our wide receivers, Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnston, Romeo Dobbs, tight end, Mark Andrews. So sitting pretty at quarterback, running back, tight end, I would say. And we are trying to navigate slalom through a wide receiver avalanche draft here.
Yeah, although I would say at running back, like I do like to have there goes Alec Pierce. That's a bummer.
Yeah.
I like to have 4 through 13. That's kind of a rule of thumb for me.
Yeah.
And we didn't like if we had gone running back, then I think, maybe you don't have to be quite as worried about that. But given that we had that long stretch where we didn't take an RB2, it'd probably be good to get someone. All right.
I don't go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I don't mind Chark here. Plays Green Bay in week
I'm into that.
16. And we just need to we need
wide receiver, man.
We need bodies here. Is Chark I don't know if on any of these streams this year, I don't know if I've had a conversation about DJ Chark. I don't know if I've heard anyone talk about DJ Chark. He used to be like this sexy pick on the Jags, and now he's kind of a forgotten man.
Yeah, he is kind of interesting because I think he'll be out there, right? Like he's probably like I don't know if is he an X or a Z type of guy, but he's an outside wide receiver. I guess he's probably more of a Z. Mingo's sort of maybe more like he might have more overlap with Thielen because I talked about him a little bit as a big slot type of guy, but he might also be like kind of a big X wide receiver type of dude. So I don't know. I'm trying to figure out project actually like where those guys play is a little difficult, but my general take is that Thielen is done. I think, and people will point to contracts and stuff. And I think in some cases it's really, helpful to do that. Like, Zay Jones, I thought Zay Jones was pretty bad. He definitely proved me a bit wrong there. I don't think he's that good, but he's definitely not as bad as I thought. But he got paid a lot of money, and it was clear they had a role for him. And you can make the same case for Adam Thielen, but Adam Thielen is really old and has been in a steep decline for several years and is coming off his worst season ever. And he had pretty good quarterback play and was getting to play opposite Justin Jefferson. So I'm willing to bet against Adam Thielen basically no matter what form it takes. I'm fading Adam Thielen, not taking him. I'm taking Jonathan Mingo. I'm taking DJ Chark. So yeah, I think that if Thielen somehow has one more year left, then Chark could get kind of squeezed on routes. But assuming he doesn't have the ability to, especially down the stretch, then I think we're going to have, a starting wide receiver, which goes a pretty long way in this draft room in the 12th round. Yeah.
And dare I say DJ Chark, #better in best ball. Let's see here. Catching up on the chat. Yeah. Due to Alex saying Mingo has been gassed up over Chark. I mean, that makes a sense. I mean, I think all of us in a vacuum would rather take the kind of range of outcomes, black box pick in Mingo. Do you think there's a little overlap in their skill sets there? Or do you think they'll be deployed differently?
I don't know how much Mingo will be used as like a pure deep threat, but yeah, there's probably some overlap. I mean, they're both like probably outside wide receivers, although I don't know. Mingo is kind of tough. I mean, he's an amazing athlete. Yeah. But I don't know if maybe they'll use him more like a big slot. Maybe they'll use him as just kind of like a Michael Pittman type, more intermediate guy. It's hard to say.
So Mims goes off the board. Dulcich needing a tight end and wanting a Denver piece to correlate with our big Charger stack seems to make a lot of sense. What do you think?
I'd rather push it because we have the Everett out and we only need one more. So I think getting a fourth running back here might be better.
Okay, which one? Quick.
I'm good with any of them.
Okay, let's do Algier. We'll just play the ADP and the ranks game there. I also think we could have maybe if we thought that through, and I love these Miami backs. We do have Mark Andrews. So maybe that, if I had thought that through just a little bit more, but because this is we can still get to 5 running backs here if we did want to push it. We also have, again, I'm not excited about any of these receivers, but if we're thinking about correlation stuff, Josh Palmer's now free. If you really wanted to onslaught the Chargers, Tim Patrick kicks around late if we were looking for a Denver wide receiver who, I know a lot of people talk about, a Sutton Jeudy trade potentially. I think Tim Patrick would be one of the biggest beneficiaries if that happened too. He could certainly jump multiple rounds in ADP if that happens. So there's some guys with a pull slate.
Yeah, it's disappointing that Mims went, but you kind of know he was going to go in this room.
Yeah. So structurally, yeah. What were you going to say?
We do. We have some bringbacks on Minnesota stuff. So we have a second out for week 17. We have a Chargers absolutely roll the Broncos stack for week 17. So I don't feel horrible about not having a week 17 bring back. And I agree. Patrick cannot be cut. His contract locks him in. So yeah, he'll be there.
So the way I'm kind of looking at this board, I think we can sit on tight end. Nothing screaming to me at wide receiver. I'm probably a Miami running back here and being done at 5 running backs. What do you think?
Did Everett go?
He didn't, but I get the vibe he would maybe kick around, but yeah, that would get us done at tight end.
Let's do it. Let's just correlate him and be done.
Okay. Yeah, it's at ADP. Let's circle back to the question someone had before about there's obviously pros and cons to overstacking or onslaughting a team. We now have Herbert, Ekeler, Keenan, Quentin Johnston, and Everett. Where is the line for you on too much as far as correlating a single team?
I think that's the line. I think you basically want if I felt better about Josh Palmer, I would maybe even consider adding like a Josh Palmer at the very end of the draft. But part of the reason I don't feel great about Josh Palmer is because we already have the 3rd wide receiver in Quentin Johnston. So I think that's probably the line. I've done Josh Allen, Damian Harris, Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, and Deontay Hardy. I've done that, which I guess is the same. That's 3, but that's 3 wide receivers and a running back.
Yeah.
You don't have to have everyone hit your starting lineup at the end. And if Ekeler has an incredible week 15 and 16 as our 2nd round pick and gets us to the final and then duds because Herbert goes absolutely nuts and carries along even like Quentin Johnston and Everett, even if Keenan doesn't hit, like we're going to be pretty live because that's a lot of leverage for us. So I think if you're going to onslaught it, I like including the running back because it gives you that leverage element. And it's like we're trying to be directionally accurate. It's like the Chargers are going to absolutely smash in week 17. And if you like over bet that a little bit and 1 or 2 pieces doesn't come along for the ride, I don't think you have to be perfect that way.
Yeah. In my thoughts too, the overstacking I think is completely viable for building a monster team that is live for first place in the regular season. I think that has been proven out. So you get that bonus. And then like the 2 filters I personally use is one, if I'm doing it, Bosock saying I never do a 5-man stack. Like if I'm doing a 5-man stack, I want it to be a top 5 offense. And if it's not, the only other way I would consider that is if the entire stack was just super cheap, like you're getting a bunch of the Panthers or something like that, where it's all backdoor. So it's like be really cost sensitive and or make sure you're getting a really elite team. Those are kind of my 2 filters for a 5-man stack. We do have this little mini Buffalo stack. I love Tyquan Thornton. And we'll hopefully grab a Denver thing. What do you think about him here?
I like Tyquan Thornton a lot.
Yeah. Need wide receivers. We got the little mini there with Diggs. Get him it is kind of nice in the wide receiver avalanche. Eventually people let up because they've drafted, 7 wide receivers early. And now we start to get Tyquan Thornton closer to ADP.
Yeah, that helps. That definitely helps.
All right. So our structure here, we're at a 2-4-7-2 build, done at quarterback, done at tight end, 4 running backs, 7 wide receivers. Pat, we have 3 more picks. So this feels to me like a 2-5-9-2 build. Unless, I mean, if you wanted to sell me on a 4 running back build and really catching up at wide receiver, I wouldn't be completely opposed to.
I think it's a 5. I think it's probably
Yeah.
a 5. We did take a wide receiver with our first pick. What our wide receiver 2 was in the 4th round. So we didn't spend it probably, like, we definitely behind in terms of capital spent at the wide receiver position, but
Yeah.
we spent that capital on an elite tight end and an elite quarterback. So I also feel like that's a tough thing about building elite quarterback plus elite tight end in these rooms, is that like it's not like you're ahead at running back either. So yeah, it gets tough.
So anything jump out at wide receiver? Or do we finish up at running back and then?
I think we go running back if there's a name you like.
I'm just going to put Spears and Ford in the queue real quick.
Yeah, those are the guys for me.
Any correlation here we're missing? We don't have any Houston,
I
any
think
Seattle.
Maybe Ford is just like what this room needs, right? This room needs someone to. I think the contingent play is like really what. Like,
You don't think Spears has the contingent?
I think he has some contingent, but he doesn't have an ACL, and he's undersized receiving back type.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he might. He definitely has some contingent value for sure.
Yeah.
But I don't know that they'd like lean on him.
I do think with Jerome Ford, you might be able to have your cake and eat it too with a little standalone pass catching role, as not just being like a total zero. You know, like I feel like once Kareem Hunt's out of the picture, that Ford is going to get some touches. You know, I don't think Nick Chubb's getting 30 touches a game. Someone else here is going to touch the ball, and it's probably Jerome Ford.
Yeah. I think if I felt like weaker at running back, I might have preferred Spears, but Ford's like, I think he's a better home run swing.
Really?
And
Okay.
Good point. I mean, yeah, like as I'm just kind of thinking through it, I mean, he's the clear number 2. The team backs him with that. I think you could say the same for Spears, but if there's not a ton else on the depth chart, and I think he just strikes me as more likely to have the ability to come in and operate kind of as a classic lead back, whereas Spears is more in that Michael Carter type of mold. And they have Julius Chestnut, right? And Hassan Haskins still. I mean, I think they'd probably go committee if
Yeah.
around.
And, you know, the chat kind of debating about, is it Haskins? Is it Tyjae Spears? I mean, this is kind of the point of why it's really hard to draft 0 RB teams in the early part of the summer, because making that selection is a lot easier come August when we have a really good feel for who's number 2 on the depth chart and who would be the beneficiary of a Derrick Henry injury. Because right now you could be right. You could be right that like you want to leverage this backfield, get the backup running back going against the Texans twice in the fantasy playoffs and have the wrong guy, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's like, you could be massively right and then not win from it in any way.
Yeah. And I agree with the comment that Spears is the RB2 there. I think he is, but it's not, everything isn't as simple as like the RB2 comes in and it's immediately, you know, getting all that work.
So this does seem ADP wise, Claypool there, if we wanted to like have a little Tyler Algier Chase Claypool mini. That sounds like a mini that would make Josh Norris's head explode.
Yeah, Josh Norris is throwing up right now.
Or Tim Patrick there, if we are finally fishing for a Broncos.
I think Tim Patrick. I think we go Tim Patrick.
Let's lock him up. And gets us to 2-5-8-2. One more wide receiver flyer here late. Definitely some options to work with here.
Yeah, the Patrick bring back. That's definitely a week 17 bring. He'll be on the roster. He might not be active. He'll be on the roster.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, with the Tim Patrick stuff, you're going to need an injury or you're going to need a trade. But I feel like we've seen enough of Tim Patrick, you know, earning targets, being relatively efficient, that if he does get on the field, I feel pretty confident he can produce. And he kind of has that frame and profile too, where he could be a 2 touchdown guy in week 17 is what I guess
Right.
what I'm trying to say. Like I don't have to lie to myself to tell that story.
No, for sure.
So a last pick, another name that's kind of interesting too, and just thinking through like different correlation type stuff would be so we took DJ Chark. If we kind of did a stack with the Panthers without the quarterback with Terrace Marshall, is kind of interesting to me. Any other names jumping out to you? I'm basically trying to break ties in favor of correlation right now.
Marshall feels like maybe a little bit of a bet against ourselves, to be honest, with Chark, because I think they're both outside guys. I mean, honestly, if you wanted to do that, I'd say let's just take Vista.
Okay. I mean, I've got it down. Is there anything else? I'll put Laviska in the chat just for the old time's sake, but anything else stand out?
I take some Quez whenever he's correlated, because I think he still is their wide receiver 3 post signing Almeida Zacchaeus. They were talking of Quez.
Yeah,
you're getting the wide receiver 3 on the Eagles. That's pretty nice. But generally, I want to have some kind of Eagles thing going when I'm drafting him.
Let's say what if Bryce Young unlocks Laviska Shenault? What if, Pat?
I mean, the guy's been actually. I mean, hasta Laviska, you know, the dude.
Yeah,
the dude has like been pretty good when given opportunities. So we'll see. New coaching staff, new quarterback, maybe year 4 Visca is what you need.
Might as well.
Laviska va a romper por fuera. ¡Vamos! A la 15, a la 20, a la 10, a la 5. ¡Métete Laviska! ¡Hasta la vista! ¡Hasta la vista! ¡Hasta la vista! ¡Hasta la vista! ¡Touchdown! 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 ¡Laviska! ¡Hasta la vista!
There it is. There it is. We had to do it. I feel like this is going to be like my Jalen Tolbert bit, where I vowed to the people that was going to be my only share of Jalen Tolbert and I wouldn't draft him again. I have a feeling this is going to be my only share of Laviska in Best Ball Mania 4.
Well, we did. It was a good way to do it, right? We get correlation. We got a correlation with the Chark and Visca. I mean,
Let's recap the team. I'll run through the players, Pat, and then you can kind of give your analysis on how you feel about the structure, the picks, kind of how things shook out in a macro sense. So 259 Bill, Justin Herbert, Kirk Cousins at quarterback, running backs, Austin Ekeler, Cam Akers, AJ Dillon, Tyler Algier, Jerome Ford, wide receivers, Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnston, Romeo Dobbs, DJ Chark, Tyquan Thornton, Tim Patrick, and of course, Mr. Visca, Hasta Laviska himself, tight end, Mark Andrews, Gerald Everett. Thoughts?
So, okay, we get Ekeler as a value in the second. We get Andrews. It's not a huge value ADP wise, but I think a huge value relative to just how impactful he could be in the third. Then we get a falling Herbert, who we've double stacked already to that point. So those are our 3 detours away from wide receiver in the first 7 rounds. And I think all of them were like really good picks individually, but the room did punish us for that.
Yep.
They definitely punished us. And that's why this drafting environment is so difficult, because every single one of those picks I feel like really strong about. And I'm like, which one should we have not done? I guess maybe the Andrews one, but that allowed us to do the elite tight end with the 2 tight end build, which ended up being really impactful here, to have us, give us the extra bullets at wide receiver. So I don't know. I just think that this is a difficult drafting environment when everyone snaps up the wide receivers. Maybe we could have reached a little bit for wide receiver instead of taking like Cam Akers. Maybe we take a Michael Thomas there, or instead of AJ Dillon, maybe we reach for a wide receiver and grab a Jacoby Myers and just get like a little bit more of like a veteran guy who's going to have a chance to just hit our lineup at wide receiver. But at the same time, Cam Akers and AJ Dillon are pretty good RB2s and RB3s. So I just, as you can tell, I'm bummed that our wide receivers aren't a bit stronger, but I feel pretty good about how we navigated the room overall.
Yeah, to your point of like being like, where would have been the detour that we should have made? seeing the AJ Dillon pick. So on the Cam Akers pick, one would have been like, do you take a guy like Jameson Williams, who this is a team we need to catch up with at wide receiver
I don't
firepower?
think so. I don't think this is a JMO team.
See, I mean, I think you can make the case for him in both instances when you're loaded at wide receiver and your seventh guy is JMO, and how is he going to crack your starting lineup? Well, he's just really good, but also being like, we're going to need enough firepower down the stretch. But then the other one would have been, Pat, I think, if we reached for one of these rookies, the Rashee Rice, the Jonathan Mingo, basically instead of the AJ Dillon pick.
Yeah, my thinking would have been to do like a Myers, because we have the two rookies already. So like that's why Jameson Williams would have been tough, because it's like we need like wide receiver points out of the gate. We actually have some late season explosiveness built in. So, but I think we got some of that. We got that, with Romeo Dobbs. Like if Romeo Dobbs like holds off Jaden Reed for the first 6 weeks into wide receiver sets, like that could be massive for us.
Yep. And this does go to the thing. I think structurally, though, despite not getting some of the players in the pockets to line up, I do think we at least recovered in that we kept hitting wide receivers. I am glad that we left that little running back bullet in
Me
the
too.
tank.
That was big.
I am
Kirk Cousins
wondering.
pick was huge, actually.
Yeah, and that's the tough stuff to like being really dynamic in a draft room and kind of understanding how things are changing. But ultimately, I like the structure of this team, and it'll be interesting to see how this draft room plays out. But let me get this labeled here, Pat. The last time we drafted was at the very beginning. You can see back here, BBB with PK back in the middle. We did 2673 build and a 2682 build.
Can I see that real quick? Will you have it?
Yeah. So our first one, coincidentally, another Kirk Cousins team.
Wow.
We were real thin at quarterback.
Real thin at quarterback.
Kirk Cousins and Bryce Young.
Some might say too thin.
Some might say too thin. Zero RB, though, Gibbs as an anchor at pick 49. Good luck getting that these days. Isaiah Pacheco, Charbonnet, Brian Robinson, Raheem Mostert, Chase Brown. Fun room there. Wide receivers, this is where it gets fun. Justin Jefferson, Devonta Smith, T. Higgins, Terry McLaurin, Treylon Burks, Marvin Mims, Alec Pierce, and then tight ends Dulcich, Hayden Hurst, Sam Laporta. Pat, I think you snuck in the only 3 tight end build I have this year on this first team.
I kind of like the 3 tight end build. I like them a lot more than you do, because I also don't mind going like Andrews and then you punt off your tight end 2, but you grab 2. I think I did like an Andrews, Hunter Henry, where I had a Bills thing, and Durham Smythe on DraftKings the other day.
Wow. Yeah, you did the Smythe thing, huh?
I did the Smythe thing. Yeah, I'm just like, I'm going to spend no capital on my tight end 2. I am spending an extra roster spot, but it's like, hey, I get a touchdown in a random week, and that gets me through. And I'm just trying to have the Andrews hammer. So I think you can, obviously, I don't want to go like Andrews and Njoku in a third. I think that's bad, but I'm experimenting a little bit more with burning an extra roster spot, particularly this time of year when we're more likely to land on dead roster spots at running back and wide receiver. So if I just take a tight end with a job that at least has a chance to contribute to my lineup.
I think what happens, I do really not like 3 tight end builds in general, but I'm also very flexible and open to taking what the room gives me. And if I were to get boxed out of tight end, I would have no problem using 3 late picks on a tight end. But what I notice happens to me in drafts is whether people are, chasing running backs or wide receivers or whatever, is that there's almost a point in every draft where I'm like, man, Pat Freiermuth is a really nice value, or I have Justin Fields and Cole Kmet is just sitting here to get that correlation. And so whether through ADP values or correlation, I just always feel like there's a really nice pocket of the draft for me to make that tight end selection and open me up to a 2 tight end build. And then once I get the green light for a 2 tight end build, I'm almost always taking it. Yeah.
No, and I loved it in this build, getting Everett and being done was big. And I think it somewhat depends on like what the rest of your team is looking like. We knew we were behind at wide receiver, and we weren't like overly strong at running back. So being done at tight ends was pretty big. Being done at quarterback at 2 was very big for us because we needed those roster spots at both running back and wide receiver. So if you feel like, oh, I'm super strong at wide receiver already, I might even stop at like 7 wide receivers in this build. Then to me, I'm like, well, is it a scratch off ticket at running back or a tight end with a job? I think you can make the case for both, and
Yeah.
I would say you don't want to just go one way or the other entirely, but I've been open to it in that type of build.
All right, Pat, really appreciate you swinging by. Super excited to be doing this regularly on Wednesdays. You're going to get a ton of me on Wednesdays because we're going to have our Best Ball Breakfast show at 10 a.m. and then we're going to have Ship Chasing at 9:15. So Wednesdays with Pete and Pat. We mentioned your rankings at the top of the show. Legendary Upside. There's underdog credits available. You got the premium pod where you narrate your posts. I've really been enjoying that. Anything else that people should look for at Legendary Upside? And I got the links down below to Pat's YouTube, to his Twitter, and to legendaryupside.com.
Well, I had jury duty last week and on Monday, so that cost me some writing time. They didn't let me write about fantasy football while I was being potentially selected as a juror, unfortunately. So there's a couple pieces that I'm kind of getting laid out, but I'm going to go do that right now and get some writing done and probably write a bit tomorrow. And so hopefully I'll have a piece out late in the week for you guys. And yeah, go sign up, legendaryupside.com/early. Get that $30 discount. That's running through July 18th. But the underdog credits have a limited supply. So those are first come, first serve. Sign up yearly and get those. And yeah, man, this was fun. I'm excited to do this every Wednesday.
Awesome. So I'm going to say goodbye to Pat here and bring on RotoViz Shawn Siegele. Pat, we will catch you later tonight for our show on Ship Chasing with Eric Beimfor. Until then, Pat will be on this channel a week from today. Peace out, Pat. All right. It's none other than Shawn Siegele. I think somehow making your first ever appearance on my channel. We've obviously done lots of stuff over on Ship Chasing. I think one time I uploaded a Stealing Bananas episode that you, me, and Gretch had done here, but first time you on the airwaves. Welcome to the show.
Well, I'm pretty excited. So we're going to draft some teams here and hopefully it's as much fun doing this as all of the other projects we've done together.
Yeah, and I know a lot of you guys know Shawn, and if you don't, I am begging you to crawl out of your fantasy football rock and experience Shawn Siegele, my personal favorite analyst in the biz. A lot of people know him as the pioneer of the zero running back strategy, someone who I consume all of his content over at RotoViz, has collabed with our friend Ben Gretch, done all kinds of great stuff, has the Overtime podcast with Colin Kelly over on the RotoViz network. And I said, you know what? It's time to do a regular show with Shawn. I want to be able to pick your brain each week. Being the guy just peering through the window, listening to you talk on your podcast wasn't enough. I was like, I got to be in person with Shawn breaking this down. So I'm super excited about this.
Well, I know my best chance to finish in the top 10 of BBM4 is with you. So here we are.
Yeah, exactly. That's, Chess Liam, I was doing chess streams with him during Best Ball Mania 2. He goes on to win. Pat, I do regular streams with on Ship Chasing last year, goes on to win. And so Shawn, this was just ulterior motives for you. You're just like, if I just go on this show weekly, then I become a 3 millionaire.
That is the biggest incentive. But I mean, we have to point out that your teams have finished very high on multiple occasions.
Well, I will say too, like all jokes aside, I do really enjoy the process of drafting with someone else in real time because we all have our tendencies and the stuff we like to do. And sometimes you fall into the same rhythms, or sometimes in my case, it's bad habits. And like when I drafted the team with Eric Beimfor that finished top 10, that was like us ping-ponging ideas back and forth, him getting me on stuff I wouldn't otherwise do, and vice versa. And I do sometimes think you can get this Voltron effect of like your best ideas, my best ideas, me understanding a draft room, you having these sharp player takes or whatever kind of configuration it is, and really making unique teams that just have a chance to be different in special ways.
Exactly. And as you mentioned, if you draft too much with the same person or just do a lot of drafts with someone who sees the fantasy world very similarly, then I mean, you can get into a little bit of a rut. Now, I say that also believing the people actually should be pretty concentrated in their player selections. And that maybe is a little bit different than the way some people approach it. And that's not that it's wrong to approach it that way. But I do still prefer to go after the guys that I think are going to be the tournament winners. And one of the things that we know is a huge element of, putting together a good best ball team, certainly putting together good teams in other formats as well, is that you have to have the structure right. At the same time, we know that what works in any given season is going to be at least slightly different. Occasionally, it's very different. One of the really cool things, I think, when you go back and look through the roster construction explorers is that you can see that basic elements of structure do tend to work year after year after year. But there are elements within that, or individual, we'll just say things that happen during a given season that will distort it or will make a certain year work in a very specific way. And that comes back to players and the specific guys who had the big seasons. And I think that 2022 was actually one of these years that was pretty unusual. And so we have to lean into what happened last year and make sure that we're getting the takeaways from it, but understanding that there are probably some unique elements. And one of the years that just really jumps out as another potentially, or not potentially, it was a very unique year, was 2016. And that's pretty relevant for 2023 because 2015 had really shifted ADP and people were finally starting to understand that zero RB is what works. But then you have this crazy running back dominant year and it shifted everything back for years and years and years. Well, now we're sitting kind of at that intersection again, where you have good values on running backs. And if you had a season where running backs stayed healthy and scored points, then everything that we think works right now would look very different recording this show a year from now. So that part I think is interesting, but kind of going back to the point of player concentration, I want to make sure that I'm at least going after the guys that I think are going to dictate this season. And yet I draft a lot of teams, obviously, with Ben. I draft a lot of teams with Blair Andrews, just fantastic writer and managing editor at RotoViz. And especially, I think when I draft with Blair, sometimes it'll just like, I do kind of think we need to draft a running back. And you never want to be the person who's telling the other guy that we need to draft a running back. So.
Well, I want to ask you about, and we're going to obviously hop into a draft here soon, but I have so much fun kind of picking your brain. And I got to preview a best ball piece you're working with over at RotoViz. Another piece of housekeeping too, the audio for these is going to appear on the RotoViz podcast feed. So if you guys are the audio listeners, make sure you guys are subscribed over there. I believe what we're going to call this, Shawn, this show is the Best Ball Banana Stand here. Shawn's old fantasy football blog, of course, a reference to Arrested Development, Money in the Banana Span. I thought the banana stuff worked pretty well here with our breakfast theme. So we're going to go with Best Ball Banana Stand. So if you are listening to this in audio over on the RotoViz network, we appreciate you guys. But one thing I wanted to ask you about, Shawn, because you do a lot of work looking at this historical data, and there's often a lot of debate about, okay, this stuff is descriptive. Is this actually predictive? But then you kind of highlight when you see the same things popping up year over year, even in slightly different formats. You guys have a lot of the fan ball data, the old MFL 10 data. You do see trends, but I am kind of curious, how do you think about that idea of like descriptive data and also knowing the descriptiveness of it is actually getting us like close to an optimal, which isn't necessarily the thing that gets us levered up to first place. Like, in DFS, like doing what's optimal, everyone does what's optimal right now. And you're actually finding ways to get unique. My guess, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, is that it's your player takes, it's your aggressiveness on specific players that gives you a chance to be unique within optimal structures. Would you say that's a fair characterization?
Yeah, there are so many things to sort of unpack there because that, in so many ways, is fantasy football in a nutshell. And you mentioned that we have a lot of the old data from different formats. There's some very obvious ways in which that doesn't necessarily relate to underdog, if that's the main thing that you're looking at. And certainly that's what we'll be drafting. But there are also a lot of elements that are just directly, you can look at that and say, this has been the trend in terms of what worked here. If it didn't work in areas where it would be directly applicable, then that's something to look at. So if zero RB worked in these years in FFPC and didn't work in these, even though there are some very big differences, you can say, well, 2022 was a specific year. It's not that everything that worked in 2022 with underdog is going to work again. And I think people understand that, but it's really hard to not chase that. At the same time, one of the things, and I mean, I'm obviously super biased, but I do think that kind of a turning point in fantasy and certainly in best ball was when Mike Beers introduced the roster construction explorer and some of those tools. And you just had so many easy ways to go in and look through the data and say, yeah, I mean, 0 RB, and you don't have to call it that at all. Wide receiver heavy types of builds have been utterly dominant. And all of the simulations, and there are people who, do things that just absolutely blow my mind, just incredible work with data and simulating the seasons and giving you all types of interesting looks at the way the season's going to come out, how individual players are going to perform. And yet one of the issues there, it's very difficult to accurately simulate the fantasy elements of the contingency-based portion of running back play. And so almost everything that people would do looking at best ball would say running back heavy builds should work. There are going to be a couple of seasons, or we're going to have another season like 2016. And last year, I specifically drafted, it's still pretty a low percentage, but I drafted some hyper fragile teams because there was, I thought, an exploitable opportunity there if the season hit in a certain way that the move more in favor of wide receivers was going to potentially create some super teams. I mean, that didn't work at all. And I think actually this year, even though ADP moves even more in the direction of wide receivers, I think that actually makes it more difficult to do hyper fragile as opposed to easier. But, so as we look at that though, the thing that is so helpful with this descriptive info from the roster construction explorers is that it lets you see that the things that people will tell you you should do, that rarely ever works. Well, if it rarely works, I mean, do you really want to chase these seasons when it might? And again, I mean, you and I will probably do some fun running back heavy teams at points just to, switch some things up a little bit. But you do want to understand what you're doing there and understand the risks that you're taking.
For sure. Yeah. And that's the thing too. And, one thing that I've really been trying to focus on lately is being very flexible in rooms. And now that I am streaming all my Best Ball Mania drafts, sometimes people want me to draft the 0 RB team, over and over again. And I like drafting those teams, but a lot of times these rooms aren't giving it to me in clean ways. And so I just keep telling myself I'm going to draft the best possible team I can for this specific room. And even though ideally I'd like to sometimes execute other structures, I don't want to. I always have this thing stuck in my head that you talked about often in Superflex, where it's like, or the year like CMC was the head 101 and there were kind of suspect backs at the end of the round 1-2 turn. You don't want to draft a watered down version of what the teams got to do early on. Same with the Superflex stuff. It's like, I don't want to take, Deshaun Watson to try to compete with the Jalen Hurts team in round 1. I'd rather beat you at other positions. And I think that can sometimes be applicable in these draft rooms where everyone's kind of trying to do what you're doing too. I don't want to draft a watered down version of your 0 RB team. I want to try to beat you at other positions.
Exactly. And so much of 0 RB from the beginning has been this idea of we don't want to chase points. And you can build teams that are better structurally and you're not chasing points. Well, now as things have evolved, you've got to make some different moves still. But it's about not chasing the points and not putting yourself in a position, exactly like you said. You don't want to draft a watered down version of what somebody else in your draft room is already doing better.
So we are underway here in the second draft, my 28th Best Ball Mania draft. We are on the clock with the 105. I do have Shawn's and Michael Dubner's blended RotoViz ranks uploaded here. You can see, Shawn, I have a lot of Cooper Kupp. I love him at 1.5, unless there's anything else jumping out to you here.
No, I think that'll be a fun way to do it. I don't have a ton of Kupp in the early going, even though I have him pretty aggressively ranked.
Yeah, I got a sneak peek at some of your personal ranks the other day, and one thing that was interesting to me was we did see a flippening in ADP on Underdog, Tyreek Hill jumping Cooper Kupp. I know you have Kupp ahead of Tyreek Hill. Will you talk about that decision point? Because I do think for whatever reason, drafters are maybe a little spooked on Kupp, whether it's the injury, whether it's the offense, and they do feel much more comfortable clicking Tyreek Hill right now.
Yeah, that part. And there are strengths and weaknesses to both players' profiles. I think one of the things with Hill is that Tua is just egregiously priced. And so if you can get a high scoring receiver to start your team, and you know that even if you reach a little bit by ADP, you're still drafting Tua at a massive discount to his true value. The idea with Hill there, and I think also with Jalen Waddle, who is undervalued, and one of the reasons why my teams are skewed to Waddle is, number one, obviously it's easier to get him, and then number two, he's got a better chance to outperform, even though anybody drafted in that range has got to score a lot of points just to meet what you're trying to achieve there. But I think Waddle is such a massive talent. You could see a flip. Why not draft the cheaper guy who may also have more upside for this coming season? And the thing with Tua and these prices on the receivers is that the prices on the receivers can't possibly be right unless Tua's price is wrong. And so, right. I mean, you're getting a free couple rounds there when you start to build your stack.
And I've noticed you do this with great success of where you play, even though you like both wide receivers, you prefer to tilt your exposures toward the cheaper guy. I remember it was a couple of years ago, it was Deebo Samuel was going in the 8th, 9th round, and Brandon Ayuk had gotten steamed up into the 4th. You were heavy on Samuel. Last year, you and Gretch were getting into disagreements because you're saying you got to play the Eagles through Devonta Smith right now. And it wasn't that you didn't like AJ Brown, but you're just adjusting for cost. It wasn't close. And it sounds like you're kind of there right now with Tyreek Hill and Waddle, where it's like they're so close for you that you would just prefer to play it through Waddle in most instances?
Yeah, what we're trying to figure out is how do you get exposure to the teams that are going to be really explosive? And then how do you get exposure to young players who have breakout upside? Well, in most cases, the best way to do that is just to take the less expensive player. And then you just have a lot more cushion built in as well in terms of what you're going to be able to get for the prices there. And you can load up on some other guys at the very top.
So this is definitely a wide receiver avalanche room here. I mean, it's a pretty big gap after T. Higgins. We also have the elite quarterbacks on the board, Breece Hall, Tony Pollard. What direction do you go here while recognizing kind of the dynamics of this room?
Yeah, I don't have a big issue with Higgins. He's, again, kind of that way to play the Bengals a little bit less expensively. When we know that Jamar Chase is such a massive star. That's not one where I'm expecting the number 2 to outscore him, but they've gone through big stretches where that has been what happened. And I mean, I've got so much Chase in Dynasty other formats. It would be devastating if he got hurt. But if you imagine this scenario there, I mean, T. Higgins would be in the mix to be the overall wide receiver 1.
Yeah. And so so it is kind of a similar dynamic, right? Where it's like you love Chase, but man, Higgins is a cheaper way to play it. Do you have any thoughts just kind of on the dynamic of this room? This room, I can tell with all the badges, all the familiar faces. The draft I just did with Pat was very wide receiver heavy. Underdog in general, as Pat said, is very wide receiver heavy now, but even more so. How have you been in some of these rooms where people are drafting like you do? Do you try to ski out in front of the avalanche? Do you try to get the values? I feel like that pick there, Higgins is a nice selection there in general, where I didn't see a screaming running back value where it's like this guy slipped so far past ADP that would be the selection. I'm just curious, how do you handle the dynamic of those rooms?
It is interesting because, as you mentioned, when you see the rooms full of the experienced players, it's going to be wide receiver heavy. You're not going to get these huge ADP values. Whereas I did a draft the other day, like every player I drafted was, after you get past the first 4 or 5 rounds, it's like 20 picks below ADP. And you're thinking, well, this isn't exactly how I wanted to play it in terms of kind of combinations of players, but you're just getting such massive values. You have to take those. I think that you want to stay with the receivers here. One of the things I mentioned at the tops, I think this is actually not as good of a season for hyper fragile, specifically because number 1, you can get avalanched, and number 2, I mean, you're going to, but then number 2, there's no punishment for waiting on running back in 2023. The dead zone element doesn't really exist because of guys being pushed down and because, again, of the specific players in the league this year. And that's one of the things that I think is important. People lean so heavily into structure. You have to, it's extremely important. And yet you have to figure out how your specific board is going to allow you to create teams that you really like in a given season. I mean, I like a lot of the running backs in the range where you would pivot to running back. And so from that perspective, I think you want just a ton of these receivers.
Yeah, so the one receiver based on ADP here, I think Metcalf would be that pick. You could also make a case for Jalen Hurts, 9 picks past ADP. Very curious what direction you'd go here.
Yeah, I think that this is either Breece Hall or I'm fine just starting with the big reaches for guys like Keenan Allen and Jerry Jeudy. I have them ranked way ahead of ADP.
Let's do Breece, because I do think just if we play the ADP game a little bit, I think we'd be able to get one of those guys at the next pick. Maybe I'm being naive. Maybe not in this room. But talk to me a little bit about Breece Hall. I feel like everyone in his agreement, if he was fully healthy last year, played the whole season, he'd be like a 1-2 turn pick, maybe even a 1-8, 1-9 pick. You're getting a discount. People worried about the injury. How do you kind of weigh the risk rewards of maybe an ambiguous timeline for Breece Hall?
Yeah, with Hall, you have that situation where even after he tested like a mega athlete at the combine, there was still some question of whether or not that was going to play at the NFL level, whether that long speed was going to be there, and then also whether he could catch passes. Both of those questions were answered in such a massive affirmative that, I mean, you're basically talking about Le'Veon Bell or David Johnson with long speed. I mean, you're talking about Jonathan Taylor, who can catch the ball. And now you have an offense that's going to be functional. I mean, Breece Hall has a great chance, if he's healthy by the end of the first month, to be the highest scoring running back from that point on. And so I just think you have to take a little bit of risk. One of the things about drafting some of these teams is I tend to be drafting for playoff advance rate, definitely trying to draft for week 16 advance, and then you want that week 17 upside. But as I do that, and I think about how do you create individual seasons where you have huge numbers of teams not only advance, but when you look at them, there are teams like King Cap's team last year, where maybe it's in the mix to win the regular season title, whether it's in the mix to, have 3 or 4 of your teams in the top 10 at the end. To do that, you've got to lean into some of these picks that could, if they go wrong, destroy your advance rates. In any given year, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and that's a big topic too. And it plays out in stuff with people talk about bye week stuff, and there's all these things that could slightly hurt your playoff advance rate. And I mean, we've even seen it in the data, going back, where at least it was last year when Dubner and I were looking at the Best Ball Mania 2 data, where it was like 0 RB teams had lower playoff advance rates than the other strategies, anchor RB, and yet they had the best advance rates for getting to the finals, which intuitively lines up with the strategy of you're waiting for the chaos of the season to kick in, these rookies for their roles to grow, for injuries to thrust guys up the depth chart, and then supercharge those teams down the stretch. And so you're really asking yourself, am I willing to sacrifice a little bit of advance rate to have a juggernaut team, or a team that can actually win first place out of 441 teams in week 17?
Right. And the thing about that is that our favorite picks, the guys on the 0 RB candidates list, all those guys have really hit in the last couple of seasons at the end. And so that's going to skew it a little bit. You have to realize that. But I mean, the power of 0 RB down the stretch is just massive.
So we do see a lot of wide receivers going off, but we do get Keenan Allen, who you had brought up even in the third. So I'm guessing you're pretty on board with Keenan here.
I am. We could also, yes, I am.
Yeah, I think looking at the board here, B-Spurf is in the chat threatening to go double elite QB here. We'll see if he wants to go Mahomes in Burrow. But yeah, this is wide receivers flying off the board. You mentioned Jeudy too. You're extremely high on Jeudy. I feel like people are kind of throwing their hands up in the air with the Broncos right now. Still some trade rumors lingering. They bring in Marvin Mims. People don't know if Russell Wilson, is going to be good. Where's your bullishness on Jerry Jeudy coming from?
We've got a variety of, number one, he was awesome in college. And the players around him, those other receivers, also awesome at the NFL level. He comes in and there are a variety of advanced metrics that like him in terms of being able to command targets across those first couple of seasons, those first 3 seasons. And you have that situation where because of quarterback play, because of injuries to him, and because of the offense, he's continually knocked down. Then he goes on that hot stretch at the end of last season. I kind of think that's who he is. I also don't think the other guys are elite players at this point. So if the Broncos are able to get it going again with Sean Payton, if Russell Wilson can play even just a little bit, then you're going to have this offense bounce back. I also really like that Week 17 battle between the Chargers and the Broncos. I like to play that a lot across all of the teams. Now, Marvin Mims is the guy there who I think you want late, who, I mean, was probably the second best wide receiver prospect in the entire draft. Yeah. You can play it that way too. But I mean, this is the year where Jeudy would jump to be a top 10 wide receiver if he's going to get it done.
I like it. All right. We are going to be on the clock here. Don't the elite quarterbacks come off the board. Definitely still have some wide receivers here in Godwin and Jaxon Smith-Njigba. We can get our elite tight end. I mean, we got TJ Hawkinson sliding 5 picks past ADP. Some options here. What do you like?
Yeah, it's tough to pass on JSN in any type of wide receiver heavy draft. I'm good with Hawkinson. Do you have a preference between those two guys?
I want to select JSN because I want to hear you talk about JSN because I love JSN. I was extremely naive on draft night. We were on the ship chasing live stream, not together, but later that night. And I was excited about this landing spot because I said, Shawn, we're going to get a JSN discount. People are going to be so worried about Metcalf and Lockett. I think I had thrown out, I was like, could we get 8th round JSN? And I could not be more wrong about that because drafters are not letting him slip out of the 5th round. It's also this funny dynamic. You go on Twitter, you'll see all these tweets. I hate the landing spot for JSN. Tyler Lockett's better. He's going to be buried. And then people who have skin in the game on Underdog are never letting him slip past the 5th round. Clearly, you are closer to the latter side of things. Sell me on why JSN is still a smash, even at these elevated prices.
He's just so good. Right. So we'll see. The NFL teams seem to not like the fact that he kind of decided to not play his entire final season to protect himself for the NFL. They don't like that kind of lack of toughness, that lack of team spirit. If in fact there was any of that, I mean, that's the only possible explanation I can think of, because you've got a guy here who it's extremely unlikely that anybody is going to be the next Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase. Those guys are just so good. But if you talk about even like the next tiny step down, the numbers in that season where JSN is better than Garrett Wilson, who justifiably is going at the 1-2 turn. I think he probably should be a 1st round pick. Better than Chris Olave, who, I mean, Connor had this fantastic article on the site just in the last week talking about how his weighted targets per route run, absolutely insane. I mean, you're not getting much of a discount on Olave. Those two guys just incredibly good. JSN just completely blows them away. Now, is it going to translate to the NFL in the same way? I mean, there's always the possibility that it won't. But this is a guy who I think crushes Metcalf, crushes Lockett, becomes the top guy in that offense by midseason. And you want some exposure to him. You want some exposure, again, because of some other things that it helps you do with your build. But when we're talking about individual players who could change the entire season, he's one of those guys. Geno Smith was so good last year. It's hard to maintain enough skepticism. You've got to force yourself to do it because skepticism is definitely justified. And yet having this third guy now, and that helps Smith so much too. And any type of regression that he might have is going to be at least now counterbalanced to an extent by having a third potential star. I mean, those 3 guys are really good.
Yeah. And I do think that's the thing too of like, and people get tripped up on it. And you were saying the same thing about running backs, right? Where you look at median projections or you're trying to divvy up a target share. And sometimes it's hard to account for what if this player is truly generational? What if he is that good? And then you layer in the late season charge elements of it. And I've always kind of done the thought experiment of Amon-Ra St. Brown was free that 1 year. If you knew how he finished down the stretch where he went scorched earth, where would you have taken him in drafts? You were probably taking him in the 2nd or 3rd round, just knowing his finish. We're back on the clock here. We got one last elite tight end in Dallas Goedert kicking around. We also have 2 Pittsburgh wide receivers here. All of these guys look viable. What's your thought?
Yeah, I prefer whichever Steelers receiver you like.
Let's do Pickens here. We'll just play the ADP game. I've taken slightly more Deontay Johnson. I know you are kind of on a Kenny Pickett second-year breakout train, and I'm guessing it seems like you think all of these guys, Pickens, Deontay Johnson, Freiermuth, that all of them could have better than expected years?
They could. And the price for Pickett gives you, again, we're trying to figure out how to build rosters that have as many players where their price then gives us so much room to beat. And if they disappoint, then, I mean, that's almost basically what we paid for. I think that's where we are with Pickett. You look at the guys who have broken out in year two. Number one, Blair has great research up on the site looking at the year two breakout for first round quarterbacks. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, I mean, Pickett, maybe not an elite first round QB prospect, but you think back to last year and who were some of the best picks? You have Trevor Lawrence, you have Justin Fields, guys who were not fashionable during drafts, at least in terms of price, and then they blow things away. Is that going to happen with Pickett? I mean, he's, again, probably not as good as those players. And yet, when you're also surrounded by the weapons, the guys who have broken out in the last decade in a big way, they tend to be players who had guys around them who help. Now, some of that is just the QBs also lifting those players. But I like the weapons there. And again, I mean, this situation with that week 17 game, it's being set up very favorably to play it at prices that are affordable.
How do you think through kind of the structural decision? I'm guessing you don't have Dallas Goedert maybe quite as that elite tight end to think about that from like a structural angle. Obviously, no other correlation benefits with our team so far, but how do you weigh those wide receivers versus, say, Goedert there, the end of a tight end tier?
Well, Goedert has been an interesting guy because before he got hurt last year, I mean, you could argue that he was going to be the player who was the other huge beneficiary of that offense blowing up as opposed to Smith. And then everything changes. It was fun listening to the end of the show there.
Here, Shawn, I'm going to derail us here quickly to make a pick, and then I want to have you finish this. What are you liking on the board here?
Well, I was like reaching for Johnston. It would give us the two rookie receivers. Obviously, you're inviting some risk with that. If they start slow, if they don't, I mean, if they disappoint, I mean, the rookie receivers have a very wide range of outcomes. Even the guys that you like, you've got to be willing to work through that and have some teams that maybe do blow up because you don't get the production that you're expecting there. And yet, Johnston, I mean, he's very obviously the biggest winner of the draft, the reality draft. And so from that perspective, I think that you want to have a lot. Maybe this is a little bit of disappointment in not getting some of the points from him that I was expecting at times over the last two seasons. But Mike Williams seems to be the most overvalued player in Underdog. So, I mean, I'd be really surprised if Johnson doesn't outscore him in the second half of the year. I think if Johnson doesn't outscore him in the second half of the year, then he's a bust already. And you've got to be able to go out and outscore Mike Williams.
Yeah. Real quick, I'm going to recap our team here for the audio listeners. So we got an anchor RB team with Breece Hall in the third round. No QB, no tight end. We got 6 wide receivers, some really nice firepower here. Cooper Kupp, T. Higgins, Keenan Allen, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, George Pickens, Quentin Johnston. Kind of love having the Charger stack even without the quarterback. And then we have that Pittsburgh-Seattle week 17 going on with JSN and Pickens. But I want you to continue your thought. What were you saying that was interesting to hear Pat talking at the end of the first hour?
Well, I think RotoViz subscribers will know that we've always been huge into elite tight end for best ball. And that's one of the things, as we were talking about at the beginning of the show, you can look through the roster construction explorers in the various formats through the years, and really nothing accelerates your win rates like having an elite tight end. And that's even though some of the early drafted tight ends obviously bust. Their injuries to those early tight ends have been frustrating through the seasons. And, you know, you have a guy like Kittle, for example, who looks like he's going to be a megastar for the long term and struggles with injuries. The offense gets a little bit less favorable, some things like that. So, I mean, you have landmines, and yet elite tight end is massive. But you look at the last couple of seasons for Underdog, and 3 tight end is actually really favored in a lot of different constructions by the RCE. And I think that specifically in Underdog, it's very easy to understand why elite tight end would have a little bit less of a value. And now we're moving into a landscape where I do think that outside of Travis Kelce, you're going to have a hard time seeing the value from it. Now, Mark Andrews, if they get that offense going, can he do it? I mean, he's done it before. He could do it again. But when you look at what the roster construction explorer is telling you, and then you combine that with specific player targets, this is a very unique season for me because I really like a lot of the late tight ends. I almost always hate all of them and want to be completely covered before we get to the late rounds. The combination of what the RCE is telling me and my individual player targets, it's got me on almost exclusively 3 tight end builds.
Oh, wow. You're gonna sell me on this.
So the other part of it is that I think that 0 RB-ish, something like we've done here, is imperative for this year. And yet there are some trade-offs to where what you do at running back, wide receiver, tight end, you've got to make some choices early.
So we are on the clock here. I feel like Javonte Williams with a little way to play this week 17 mini stack with the Chargers is fun. Anything else standing out to you?
No, I mean, Dalvin Cook is always a player who, he was bad last year, but
yeah.
Do you get a little bit of that late career, almost dead cat bounce? And probably not. That's not the way running back careers tend to go. It just feels weird to not select him late. But Javonte Williams, he's a guy I've got rated well ahead of ADP. I continually move him down in my rankings so that there's not this absurd gap between where I have him and ADP. And if the reports are correct, there's a much greater risk with Williams than there is with Breece Hall, which is the reason you've got that massive gap in where you have to select them. And yet again, if Williams is ready to go even for the second half of the year, do you not want, you think of where Jameson Williams goes, and we know that he's not going to do anything. Now, the difference is that when he does come back, he will probably be healthy, but I love him. I got a ton in Dynasty, but we don't know if he's going to have practiced correctly. The Lions seem very unhappy with him. The other thing with Williams is just that Samaje Perine is a guy who's going to come in at the very top of my exposures. And so you do have a way to play it that's still a little bit less expensive. But if you looked at the fantasy playoffs, again, where we're trying to win the $3 million and the top 2 running backs are Breece Hall and Javonte Williams, would that be surprising? So especially when it fits what you're trying to do, I just think you have to pull the trigger.
Yep. So structurally still in an interesting spot here. 2 running backs, 6 wide receivers. My guess is our guy Andy will go ahead and stack up Tyreek Hill with Tua here, and then we will be on the clock. Freiermuth, kind of fun to get our first tight end and build out our Pickens our Pickens bet here. Anything else jumping out to you?
No, and that was the other note you had at the end of that previous draft where you guys were talking about Freiermuth. He's the guy who, if somebody elevates into that top tier, you would sort of expect it to be Freiermuth. And when he falls, there are so many things that he allows you to do. Now we can go 2 tight ends if we want. We can still take the 3 tight ends if the last couple of guys do things for us in terms of maybe rounding out some team targets, late. And yet, anytime that we're looking at it like this and it starts to be a very favorable team for certain players, you start to get nervous that those players are, going to be grabbed from you. But he's the perfect guy for this team we have going.
Yep. One thing I wanted to mention, so Shawn has mentioned the RCE, the Roster Construction Explorer, a few times. If you guys aren't familiar with RotoViz, I truly think it is the best bang for your buck price subscription relative to the content and tools you get in the industry. If you guys have fun and want to go query and look at different constructions and kind of mess around, that Roster Construction Explorer is awesome. Those of you who watched my videos on the Deposit Kingdom channel, you'll have seen us utilizing those. Michael Dubner pulling a lot of great stuff from there. So you're going to hear Shawn reference it a lot this summer. Highly recommend getting a RotoViz sub. You also get all of Shawn's great work, Blair, Connor O'Driscoll, who you guys know from Stat Chasing on Ship Chasing, all kinds of great contributors over there. Shawn, what's the simplest way for people to sign up? What's the promo code? I got the link down to RotoViz below, but how do people get going over there?
Yeah, just check out the site. We have the RV Radio 2023 10% off code that you can always use if you want to get it a little bit cheaper. A lot of our listeners do appreciate those kind words. People know Connor is just extraordinary. Michael Dubner has written content on the site as well. His Best Ball Bible, I mean, again, I'm hugely biased, but I feel like it was one of the best pieces of best ball content that you'll ever see. And you and he obviously put out some fantastic videos. I know most of your listeners and viewers will have seen those, but Michael does a fantastic job.
Yeah. And even if, I mean, it's still way too cheap. You can get a 2-year sub for $109. You can try out a monthly thing. Even if you just want to in drafting season right now, you can go poke around, get Shawn's ranks, get access to all of those articles. And, you know, Shawn, you do these best ball workshop series in the off season. I got a preview of a new one coming out, and it always generates a ton of ideas for me. You do kind of a concept of looking at kind of historical win rate data, but then also putting it in practice and showing, here is how I applied this in a draft while simultaneously feathering in week 17 correlations. And you're now so far ahead of me, you're heavily talking about week 16 correlations as well. So you can get all of that stuff layered together in those articles. And I want to say, Shawn, that in previous years, you were maybe not thinking about like late season correlation, maybe as much as you are now. Has that been a shift for you?
Yes and no. I think that one of the things, and let's dive into a little bit more after.
I mean, Geno would seem to make a ton of sense at ADP with no quarterbacks. Anything else I'm missing though?
Perhaps not. Do you like, what is our running back board specifically?
We got Kamara, Herbert, Kendre Miller, Damian Harris, Eli Mitchell.
No, let's go with the QB.
Okay. Yeah, I was trying to think here, you know, other potential quarterbacks in this range. Obviously, we have some late guys. We have Stafford available for a stack. We have Pickett available for a stack. If you wanted to do some kind of Rodgers, Breece Hall thing, that's there. But it did seem like we're maybe at risk of missing out on some quarterbacks if we pushed it a little too much.
You mentioned the tight end.
Yeah.
The quarterback situation is a little bit different because it is still very strongly a 2 QB preference in terms of a wide variety of things that you're trying to accomplish in drafts. And so, as you mentioned there, we start to get into a position where you get pushed into 3 QB if you don't take them there. One of the fun things about 3 QB though is if you do have them very heavily game stacked up, then it opens up some mini tournament elements of it. One of the things, and this kind of goes back to that QB question of 2 versus 3, is that as the tournaments get, you know, consistently more massive, and as we have had this, I think it's a sea change where you have the haves and the have-nots on offense, and then you also have teams leaning into their actual offensive identity even more heavily, to where game environment is playing less of a role, and it's creating fewer guardrails for some of these players to get smashed together.
We're on the clock. You had mentioned running backs. Kamara, the only running back that goes since we were last on the clock. Was there something you were eyeing?
No, I think that Miller is interesting. I mean, he needs a variety of things to happen to really pay off, but he's one of those guys who could do it in the right situation. I think that drafters are maybe, I guess, both sides of it, where they're sort of overconfident in what Jamal Williams is going to actually bring to the table there after his season last year in Detroit. Just 2 very different environments. And when you talk about an older running back who is not an elite athlete, not an elite talent, to think that that part is going to cover up or wipe out a potential young star, that I think is difficult. Alvin Kamara is much closer to the Dalvin Cook kind of situation in terms of being washed than maybe people are giving credit for. Because I get the impression, and you would have a much better idea than I do, because I tend to be a little bit more insulated from some of the news and rhetoric
discourse
and all of that. The discourse, yeah. But I get the impression that the Kamara prices are based on Jamal Williams, but then also the looming suspension, as opposed to him being a real cliff concern. And so then the flip side of that is you have Kendre Miller. He's a controversial prospect. I will probably pretty consistently be referencing Blair's Wrong Read articles and all the fantastic research that he does. One of the things, and people know this, but the young players as rookies outperform massively. So when you're looking at win rates and you're looking at advance rates, you're looking at guys who could be the player who determines the season. 21-year-old running backs have been huge. Well, Miller is in that group. Every year you don't have a ton of guys you can play. So you want to be aware of who the potential players are. You also want to be aware of the specific guy though, and his situation. And so if you don't like the prospect and you don't like the situation, you're not going to draft him just because he's a 21-year-old running back. But it is something to consider if that Saints offense is more dynamic than we're thinking. When you draft a running back, even in the range that he was drafted, you've got the young guy. When he demonstrates that he can do it, the flip that you have there where teams lean into it so heavily, again, especially at the crucial time of the year, those are the guys that win tournaments for you.
And I do think I saw someone in the comments mentioning that, this team has a chance to kind of like flame out early and not make the playoffs because we got a lot of rookies. We got a couple running backs with kind of health concerns who might start the season slow. One thing I love about the Kendre Miller pick is he doesn't necessarily fit the traditional rookie archetype where you're like, I want this guy to surge down the stretch. He might just be the lead back in the offense if Kamara is suspended to start the season. And then, like you said, he's competing with Jamal Williams for some short yardage touches, but he could be getting 60% of the work from day one. And then you get all of the other things layered into that. Maybe he runs away with the job because he's just so good. Maybe Kamara is dusted and, he's able to hold him off there. So I think that's what's kind of excited about the Kendre Miller is I almost feel like you can have your cake and eat it too from an early and late production standpoint.
Exactly. And if not for the knee injury, he would be much more expensive right now. There's still a lot of time for that to turn around. If it does, I don't think you're going to be able to get these prices in a couple of months.
So we got some quarterbacks we could sit on here, running backs. We got the Miami running backs, Jamal Williams, if you were doubling up on this backfield, wide receivers, Wan'Dale Robinson, Tyquan Thornton. I'm throwing a lot at you quick. What do you like here? 8 seconds.
Let's jump back in with Kmet.
Okay. Talk to me about Cole Kmet. He is a guy that I normally will select, with Justin Fields builds, correlated maybe with something with the Falcons. Talk to me about Kmet as kind of a standalone tight end selection here.
I'm going to try and keep my exposure to the Bears very low. And I hope that I'm wrong with that because I love Justin Fields. One of our fun bold predictions last year, I think you and I chatted about this, was that Justin Fields would rush for 1,000 yards. I mean, he almost had to because he had nobody to throw to. They changed that. He could be a breakout player. And yet I do think that that's an offense you want to be a little bit careful of when you are creating the stacks. And that I think so many of their players really do work better as standalone pieces. There are some concerns about the hybrid QBs and how well they stack up. We know that wasn't the case last year, obviously, with Jalen Hurts. That offense just destroyed the world. And so you get all the value from that. But I kind of like it when Kmet is the guy that the draft is giving you in a two tight end build. And then you've got that portion of it, and you're looking for those big kind of touchdown plays. Hopefully he gains a few more big plays, maybe some yardage on occasion there. I think he's going to have a good season, but I don't think it has to be with another member of the Bears.
Yeah, that's I like that take. That's an interesting thing there. And I know Mike Leone had put out some stuff about DJ Moore being kind of massively overvalued right now as he did a first run on Bears projections and, saying he was probably mispriced by, a couple of rounds there. So we are starting to see a little bit of a correction in the market. There's general just enthusiasm for this Bears offense taking a leap. Like you, I'm rooting for it. I want to see it happen, but I do think it's a good note to make sure that we're being mindful of how little this team might might throw here. So we have a 1-3-6-2 build right now. Geno stacked up with JSN at quarterback. We got our 3 running backs, Breece Hall, Javonte Williams, Kendre Miller. We're at 6 wide receivers, nice firepower there, and also looking good at tight end with Freiermuth and Kmet. Seems like there's a few different ways we could go here. Anything jumping out to you on the board at pick 149 for us?
Well, Wan'Dale gives you a way to play off of Cooper Kupp a little bit. Mims gives us another young guy. If we're willing to lean into that, I see him go very early in drafts. He fits another element of what we're doing with the teams. Those would probably be the 2 main directions that I'm looking.
Yep. Let's do Wan'Dale Robinson. I like that angle there with our first round pick. I think people are kind of throwing their arms up in the air about the Giants. We got all the jokes about them, bringing in 9 different slot wide receivers. But for me, after Darren Waller, like Wan'Dale Robinson is the guy I want in that room. We didn't get to see a ton of production from him last year, but when he did come on, we were starting to see the classic late season wide receiver breakout, and then he got hurt. But we saw the flashes there. And to me, almost like with the Breece Hall situation, like I feel like if Wan'Dale Robinson stayed healthy, and we saw a couple playoff games of Wan'Dale Robinson there, I feel like he'd be 4 rounds more expensive than he is right now.
And he's someone that they do want to take on a less specific or a less limited type of role. They've, as you mentioned, they've got a lot of guys who are pretty similar, but Robinson's someone they really stood up for in the draft. And then, as you mentioned, when you watch a couple of those games when he was healthy, I mean, he looks like the real deal. So in Daniel Jones, strengths and weaknesses to his profile, I mean, he's a poor man's Josh Allen, who, I mean, it's not going to take the leap to that next level. And yet an interesting QB, I think. And I don't know that Saquon is as good now as we would like him to be. I don't think that they want that offense to be as Barkley-centric as it maybe has been. They're going to have to manage Daniel Jones, but it's going to be managing him in a way that's really creative and interesting. And part of it's going to be throwing to Robinson.
Yep. I did want to just pull up this quick question. Andrew says, has the week 17 stuff, that week 17 is going to turn into a cash game and you'll see high ownership on a bunch of players that week. And that's just a product of the tournament format, right? Where you're going to have your league winners. Last year, there were a ton of playoff teams with Jalen Hurts and Josh Jacobs. Those guys smashed their ADP and propelled a lot of teams to the playoffs. And then you saw in the playoffs, certain guys having spike weeks. It was Zay Jones going off in a week, and everyone shows up in week 17 with Zay Jones because he elevated all those teams in their pod. So that's just going to be a natural thing that the best players, and then in the playoffs, the players who perform the best in week 15 and 16, they're naturally going to carry a higher ownership. And that's why the value of sneaking in some teams that have some low-owned guys like Pat did last year, all of his main stacks, players he used, Tyquan Thornton, Jacoby Myers, Gesicki, Raheem Mostert, these guys that popped up in his lineup, they weren't on a lot of teams. He didn't have Justin Jefferson, who a ton of people advanced to the finals. He had Austin Ekeler. It was basically impossible to have Austin Ekeler and Justin Jefferson on the same team. He strongly benefited from that. So almost having a team that just sneaks into the playoffs that doesn't share a lot of the common league winners. And I know it breaks people's brains, but it's actually a benefit to sneak a unique team like that into the playoff sprint.
And I think if we can have some unique teams that are also powerhouse teams, I don't think the two are necessarily mutually exclusive, then that's what we're looking to do. That's obviously what everybody's looking to do.
Let's see here. So we are about to be on the clock here for our 14th round selection. Still slightly ahead of ADP, but I wonder if we want to stop messing around and get our guy Kenny Pickett.
Yeah, I mean, the nice part about drafting with a bunch of really experienced players is that they're not going to break their teams in order to try and break yours. They understand that they're putting together a team to win the whole tournament, not just to fool somebody in a given league. But I think that
is there any opportunity cost to selecting Pickett, like someone who really stands out? Because I'm down to push it if someone stands out to you.
Most of the running backs that I have as late round priorities, I mean, you're going to be able to get a mix of them in different drafts that you like. And so if there's a different player like a Pickett that you want to make sure that you grab, I don't think it's an issue.
Yeah. And that's how I kind of normally break the ties there when I'm completing a stack. And I'm like, yeah, there's probably, I don't know, I would say in this spot, maybe it was an 85, 90% chance Pickett comes back. And then I say, is there a player that I think is at the top of a tier or that I really want or structurally fits on this team? If that's the case, then I'm willing to push it. If I'm kind of sitting there and it's flat, I'm like, why risk it? You know, we do run the risk of kind of getting boxed out on some of these clean stacks we've set up. It would have been disappointing to leave this draft without Pickett, 2 Pickens and Freiermuth there. So I like how
Pete, is the Deontay Johnson team?
But he's the double elite QB team. So
I thought it was. And so that would have been the one to be concerned about most. I mean, you have to be concerned about anybody drafting a guy who you think is a good player or could be a breakout candidate. But that would have been the biggest concern. I thought that he was on the team that was the double elite.
Yeah, that was the one thing I was weighing. B-Spurf has been known to mess with me a little on stream there too, so he might have had fun with that. David says, how do we join an Underdog Fantasy Best Ball against you? Well, I am streaming all 150 of my Best Ball Mania drafts, so I do 2 drafts on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday at 10 a.m., all kicking off on my channel. And I do have, if you're a YouTube member, and you get in the Deposit Kingdom Discord, I do tip off when I'm going to hop in a draft. That's probably your best way. But I am also down to get some private drafts going as well. You can, of course, always sign up on Underdog Fantasy with promo code Pete. Get a $100 deposit match. But lots of ways, lots of chances, David. You just got to be quick on the trigger finger because a lot of people like getting in these drafts with us here. And we are now at a 2-3-7-2 build. Here we have our nice stack with Geno to JSN, and we got Kenny Pickett here as well. I actually want to ask you about 2 quarterbacks from the same game in Week 17, how you feel about that. But we're about to make our 15th round selection. I would say structurally, we're probably like in the market for a running back here, unless anything else is jumping out to you.
No, I'm ready to start grabbing running backs with you. And so you had mentioned the ADP. Are there guys here where we need to prioritize them because of ADP at this point?
I mean, I like Singletary just in a vacuum. Take a drink when I say in a vacuum. He now slides 10 picks past ADP here. Can you say anything bad about Singletary at this juncture?
Or ever, no.
Or ever, exactly. One of Sean's longtime favorites, even when there are a lot of false flags in the Buffalo Bills backfield, Sean's still pounding the table for Devin Singletary there. But I want to hear your thoughts because this was a debate that popped up on Twitter the other day, Sean, about is it optimal or suboptimal to have 2 quarterbacks from the same Week 17 game? And this is, of course, viewing it through the lens of we're fortunate enough to show up in the Week 17 finals. Do we like having 2 quarterbacks from the same game? Is this something you've considered?
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about it as well. That was my hesitation with Geno when we were on the clock there and making that pick. Because I probably would prefer not to have it, but I don't think you have to really force yourself to go out of the way, and avoid it if it's a pick that works for the other things that you're doing. One of the things with Pickett is that another big debate and a very justifiable debate because people should be looking at the pros and cons. Doomer had a fantastic article about it, but the price of the elite QBs is tricky this year. They have huge upside, bring huge benefits. It's a difficult cost. Pickett's a perfect guy to work in with an elite QB because you want that second QB to have upside and to be stackable in a really fun way, but you want him to be cheap. Yeah. Well, in the situation here where we're not going to have an elite QB, would it have been preferable to have someone a little more exciting than Geno to go with him? I mean, perhaps. I think it depends a lot on what you're trying to do overall with the roster. So it wouldn't be my preference, but yet there are some elements there. The other part of it is that, Seattle has Tennessee in Week 16. And I don't really care.
You've already circled that one on your calendar?
Well, they should win easily, right? But is Tennessee going to be shut out multiple times this year?
Yeah, it does seem like they're headed toward a disaster season. So with that thought in mind, we're at a 2-4-7-2 here with how many more picks do we have left? We got 3 more picks. Obviously going to be selecting probably one more running back. We do have kind of what I would consider maybe like a luxury pick or even 2 here just structurally. Like, do you have any leans on like this being potentially a 3 quarterback team? I know you said you like the 3 tight end builds. Are you starting to kind of plot out structurally where we go from here, or are you still being kind of just player specific?
Well, I think that we want to get the running backs, and when you have as much early wide receiver firepower as we do, the RC is very happy with 7 wide receivers, which I believe is where we're at. So then that frees up some picks. Underdog is favorable for running backs in terms of the scoring. There are structural reasons why it doesn't actually work if you try and put your whole team together that way. And now everything is super wide receiver heavy as a result because people understand that. And yet if we can get guys that we like at running back late who have that potential to be the league winner, you're not going to hit on all those guys. And so you have to have multiple players. As the chat has pointed out, we have a lot of risk in the running back room. It wouldn't be a bad draft to be very running back heavy late.
So Zach Evans at the top. I have some thoughts about him. He does correlate with our kind of Kupp Wan'Dale thing. Anything else jumping out to you here as maybe a better pick?
Well, there's some guys that I like even later, but I don't think we need to take them yet.
Okay, so let's talk about Zach Evans real quick, because I actually just made a video about this. I've been doing best ball tips, 60-second shorts. I have a playlist for those if you want to check those out. I think this was number 20. And I just talked about, I even referenced Zach Evans in this. And, this is greatly informed by Leone's research this offseason about avoiding dead roster spots. And one of I said kind of the things that makes doing zero RB tricky earlier in the offseason is the fact that we don't have a really good feel for these depth charts. And there are scenarios where, say, Kyren Williams is ahead of Zach Evans. And even if we get the Cam Akers injury, we don't stand to benefit from it because we just don't have enough information on the depth chart. So I'm curious, how do you think about zero RB early in the offseason as it pertains to like a lack of information on these depth charts?
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things is that when you use the RCE and you break down some of the results by month, some of the benefits that you would think for zero RB early, and there are some, don't necessarily show up. And I think part of that is that you are much more likely to hit on your running backs late, right before the season starts, even if you have to pay more for them as a result. At the same time, I just can't stay away from the guys that I think are big time prospects. Zach Evans sliding in the draft to where he did was absurd. He could be a guy I'm completely wrong on, but you look at the Rams, they have very little there, and they don't like Akers. He's not a star. Zach Evans' peripherals, both at TCU and then in his final season at Ole Miss, he's an electric running back. In round 16, when you're looking for running back upside, I think you've got to take some of those shots.
And we also get the benefit, like you said, of, we are playing that week 17 game with the Rams and Giants as a bit of a little mini shootout there. So we got the correlation. 2 more picks here. Any thoughts on if this could potentially be a 3 quarterback build, or do you think this is maybe we're getting to seven running backs in this build potentially?
I think it is probably 7 running back, but one of the things that I have found surprising thus far is that there are QBs in the last round who are interesting. And so you have that out almost every time.
Real quick, 10 seconds. Which running back do you like?
Scroll down a little bit farther for me.
Yeah.
Man.
Quick.
The top
We're gonna get a hunch.
Hunt there is
We're gonna get a Kareem Hunt share.
Better Hunt than Ezekiel Elliott, right?
That's what I was gonna say. This room wants nothing to do with Zeke. He's now slid 30 picks past ADP there. It is. I will say. There's names here, but man, this is a pretty gross. There's not a ton of stuff to get excited about in the bottom of the running back bin right now.
Yeah, looking at it from this view, I missed when our 100% exposure guy went. Where did we lose Chuba in this one?
Oh, Chuba. Yeah. He went at 183. So he wasn't even available. We took the Singletary faller there, and then Chuba goes to the other thing. I recognize a lot of names in here. I know even just back to back here, Serum, shit. Yeah. The Achievers, 2 RotoViz guys right there. So, as you know, competing against RotoViz subs, sometimes you're not going to get the guys you like.
Those fellows share drafts with us. We talk about them on OT. We have a lot of fun. But the Achievers got our guy. Tyquan Thornton, somebody who is super interesting. I think should be more expensive. Weirdly, I haven't gotten a ton of him because I'm always trying to get him really late. And it seems like the drafts that I am in, he goes way before ADP. I'm sure that will change over time. Putting together some Patriots late, I think is really fun. I had a draft the other day where I selected Diggs at the 112. I wasn't that excited about that pick. And yet you get him at the 112. It's a little bit of an ADP value. And then at the 17-18, take Gesicki and Mac Jones to go with him. That's the fun part about these underdog drafts and having that additional element of really needing to build in the team part with it. You can make a first round pick with this idea that I'll just do it because my 17 and 18 picks will work perfectly. That always works out, right, Pete? Nobody ever messes up your 17 and 18 round picks.
Well, over the years, one thing you talked about a lot, and I think this was more for kind of managed stuff, but it certainly applies here as well, is reverse engineering your draft. And if you have guys that you think are extreme values or just super mispriced at the end of a draft where you think, hey, they should be going in the 10th round. I always remember the year where you were like, Tyler Boyd, this is an absurd price. He should be 7 or 8 rounds later. And you were just taking Tyler Boyd at the end of all your drafts. And then what that did for you is it freed up an earlier roster spot, because you might be saying, hey, I want to get to 6, 7 spots, wide receiver spots early, but you're basically saying I can have my cake and eat it too. I can get my 10th round, 7th wide receiver in the 18th round and then free up that 10th round spot for a running back, tight end, whatever. And so knowing the entire board really then helps you make those trade-offs in a smart way.
It does. And that's one of the things I try to emphasize to people who want to draft just hardcore structurally, is that we have so much good information about how you need to do it and then how the different pieces fit, because the structure changes based on your picks in the first 3 or 4 rounds, obviously. But within that, make sure that if you have players that are going in the 13th, 14th round, that you have a 9th round ranking on, don't take them in the 9th round to make the structure work, but also don't stick to your structure and ignore a guy who doesn't fit based on what round he's going in when you know that, again, he should be 5 rounds more expensive.
All right, Shawn, you got a running back to top us off here. 20 seconds this time. I could scroll down a little bit.
Well, do you prefer Izzy to go with Breece Hall, which in some ways is a little bit gross, or, if you don't have another guy you like, Sam Howell is always the pick.
A little third QB unstacked there. You want to do it? The people wanted a Sam Howell draft there, and they do play the Jets in Week 16. So let's do it. Let's tack on Sam Howell there. I also don't think Izzy's necessarily bad, at that cheap price. Probably not my preferred thing to do, but kind of a gross tier there at running back. But I do, as we wrap up here, I do want to touch on the end of that conversation where I really think the best thing you can do is with we understanding these structures, but then knowing how drafting like you're right, where you get the benefits of the structure, but in unique ways. So just a very simple example would be, okay, traditionally I like to take my anchor RB in the first couple of rounds. This year, people are very comfortable taking their anchor RB in the 3rd round with all that value. But what if you are taking your Joe Mixon anchor RB in the 6th or 7th because you think that situation resolves, or maybe it's Javonte Williams where you're playing at that, and then you draft that team like an anchor RB in round 1, 2, or 3. It just so happens that you took that anchor in the 8th, and basically living within those structures, but making bets in ways that you're almost flipping the board and getting on the same structures as your opponents, but with different players that aren't being utilized with those same combinations. That's something I think about a lot.
And you have to do it that way. That's the perfect explanation of what we're trying to accomplish. In some of the seasons, I think that you really do have, and obviously Ben and Jack Miller had done such great research on the dead zone. You do have this gaping chasm where there really aren't names that you can make great arguments for. I don't think that was the case last year. I think it was surprising in a way that Josh Jacobs and Miles Sanders turned out to be those two guys. And Josh Jacobs, a good example of somebody who really did thwart all of the previous information on him in terms of how big of a talent he was. 2023, there are a lot of great names across those different ranges to where you can build in. I mean, most of my teams are 0 RB, at least in one way, shape, or form. And yet I come out of all the drafts thinking, I just love these running backs. Pete, that was not the case even a couple of years ago. You had a cost that you had to pay if you went with the right structure. And you come out of the draft thinking, these guys, I like the talent. There is a good track record in college. There are some elite peripherals from their limited time in the NFL. They're either in a committee or they're a backup. We know that if they hit, they can hit big, but you're looking at them and there are a lot of ifs. There's still ifs on some of the guys that we drafted today. They're going to be ifs on your guys in that RB3 through RB6, 7 range. And yet the guys you're getting to headline these teams in most cases are really, really good.
Yep. So Shawn, let's put a bow on this. First of all, shout out to the chat. Appreciate you guys. Lawrence sending in a nice tip. Always a blast. Got to do a live morning draft with you. Always tricky for those of you on the West Coast. Appreciate you guys getting up early. Like I've mentioned a few times, this is going to be a weekly show this summer. Super excited to draft every Wednesday morning, 10 a.m. block with Pat Kerrane and 11 a.m. with Shawn. Appreciate everyone listening on the RotoViz podcast network as well. If you guys are the audio maxis, the place to get the audio from this draft with Shawn is over on the RotoViz podcast feed. And Shawn, I did want to just do one quick recap of our team before we get out of here. I'll read the picks and then kind of get your final thoughts on how you thought this draft shook out, what went well, what we would like to potentially do over. Did end up with 3 quarterbacks there: Geno Smith, Kenny Pickett, Sam Howell. Our running backs: Breece Hall, Javonte Williams, Kendre Miller, Devin Singletary, Zach Evans, and Kareem Hunt. Our wide receivers: Cooper Kupp, T. Higgins, Keenan Allen, JSN, George Pickens, Quentin Johnston, Wan'Dale Robinson. Tight ends: Pat Freiermuth, Cole Kmet. How do you feel about this team?
I like it. I tend to come out of the drafts liking them because there is a strong emphasis on the player rankings, which we discussed as something where we do want to be fairly concentrated with those guys. So it's a mix of players who have a ton of upside and then allow us to do things with the structure that's important, and then separate from the structure with the week 16 and week 17 games that are important. I'm looking to build teams that have that chance to be the regular season winner. I think that this team could be that, especially if we get outsized production from the tight ends. So if those tight ends make a little bit of a leap, and I don't love the tight ends in terms of how this worked out. One of the things with the Kareem Hunt pick is that I just think there's so much value at the end of these drafts at tight end that it's just so difficult to get stuck. Whereas if you're in a really sharp draft and they do take the running backs that you want late, then, especially if you're doing a draft with a couple people where you got to, work together on it, you can get caught maybe at some of those other positions. That's one of the areas with the 3 tight ends. But the flip side of that is that those 2 tight ends could each individually elevate. They could both elevate. If they do, then this team, it's just a real powerhouse.
Love it. And I'm super excited to, continually draft throughout the offseason. The ADPs are going to change. Our information is going to change. How we feel about certain situations is going to change. And I can't wait to navigate that all this year. A couple plugs on my end. If you want to keep watching me drafting here in about an hour and 15 minutes on the Swolecast, we are going to draft another team. And then tonight on Ship Chasing, 9:15 p.m. Eastern, Eric Beimfor from Spike Week is going to come on, and we are going to talk about the ADP landscape, about current best ball draft strategy, all of that good stuff. So you can join us on Ship Chasing for that. Shawn, obviously subscribing to RotoViz, subscribing to the RotoViz podcast feed to get your podcast column. You're going to have some great best ball workshop articles out soon. Anything I'm forgetting, if people want to go down the Shawn Siegele RotoViz rabbit hole, that I greatly, greatly recommend.
Well, I don't think I can sell it better than you did. So I appreciate that. I think that the Underdog workshops are a lot of fun. And they do what you mentioned, where we're looking at this combination of drafts, the roster construction explorer. I don't think we've talked about the roster advance rate explorer, which is like 5 tools in one, Ross Durham had a really cool article about stacking and how to win the tournament very recently on that. But using those two pieces together, along with the things that we have in our ADP tool, that part of it has been a lot of fun. And so when you have those articles that you can look at different pieces of the puzzle, and the article you mentioned that's coming out is going to be about how you make elite QB work. It has 5 principles to make that work. I wasn't necessarily expecting to have that be the case when I started, but it was really interesting to work through all of the pieces of that puzzle. This is puzzle drafting, and that part of it I absolutely love.
I do as well. Super excited for this show every Wednesday. I thought it was a great kickoff for this block. We'll be back, of course, next Wednesday. If I don't see you guys, if you're just Best Ball Breakfast Maxis, have a great Memorial Day weekend. Enjoy the time off with all your friends and family. And of course, drafting all kinds of teams. Underdog, of course, launching the Poodle draft. Poodle number 2, another 20 max there for $7 if you guys are liking to get in some practice reps before doing some of your Best Ball Mania drafts. But shout out to Pat Kerrane. Check him out on Legendary Upside. And for Shawn Siegele over at RotoViz, I'm Pete Overzet. This is Best Ball Breakfast. We'll see you guys.